Zikr, or Dhikr in Sufism, is a profound and transformative practice of the repetitive remembrance of God, a spiritual discipline designed to foster a deeper, more intimate relationship with the divine. This practice is central to Sufi mysticism, where the act of remembering God, often through the repetition of divine names or phrases, becomes a sacred vehicle for spiritual elevation and inner purification. The repetition of God's names is not merely a mechanical or rote activity. It is a means to attune the heart and mind to the presence of God, cultivating a profound sense of connection, peace and divine closeness. The term Zikr itself originates from the Arabic root dhikr, meaning to remember or to mention. In its Sufi context, it refers to the conscious, intentional act of remembering God in every moment of life, with the purpose of nurturing a deeper awareness of God's reality. The practice involves reciting specific names or attributes of God, such as Allah ar-Rahman, the Merciful, or al-Malik, the King, often in a rhythmic, repetitive fashion. This repetition helps the seeker focus their thoughts on God, gradually guiding them into a state of mindfulness, where distractions fall away and the heart becomes solely centered on the divine. Zikr can be practiced both individually and in group settings, and it is often accompanied by physical movements, such as the rhythmic swaying or spinning witnessed in the Sufi practice of the whirling dervishes. In these communal gatherings, the collective remembrance of God creates an atmosphere of spiritual energy, where each participant is drawn into a shared state of devotion and presence with the divine. Through the power of repetition, the group dynamic amplifies the individual's connection to God, fostering a profound sense of unity and collective transcendence. The effect of Zikr on the practitioner is often described as deeply purifying and elevating. The repeated utterance of God's name serves to cleanse the heart and mind from worldly distractions, ego-driven desires, and negative emotions, enabling the seeker to attain a state of spiritual clarity and peace. Through Zikr, the seeker becomes more attuned to the divine presence in all aspects of life, experiencing a heightened sense of God's nearness in both the ordinary and extraordinary moments of existence. This purification process is known as tazkiyah, or spiritual refinement, and it is considered a crucial step in the journey toward divine union. In Sufi thought, the practice of Zikr carries a transformative power that transcends mere mental or emotional concentration. It is a spiritual discipline that gradually opens the heart to God's love and grace, allowing the practitioner to experience God's presence in a deeply experiential way. As the repetition continues, the individual moves beyond mere words and enters a state of divine remembrance, where the recitation itself becomes a form of meditation, grounding the practitioner in the present moment. Every breath becomes a reminder of God's omnipresence and sovereignty. Through the act of Zikr, Sufis also seek to experience what is referred to as fana, the annihilation of the self in the divine. The repetition of God's names and attributes serves to dissolve the ego, allowing the seeker to transcend their individual identity and merge with the eternal presence of God. In this state, the individual no longer perceives themselves as separate from the divine, but experiences a profound unity with all that is sacred and holy. Zikr, therefore, is not simply a spiritual practice but a way of life for the Sufi. It infuses every moment of existence with divine awareness, transforming the mundane into a sacred opportunity to remember and connect with God. The rhythmic repetition of God's names becomes a bridge, leading the practitioner from the ordinary to the mystical, from the self to the divine, offering a direct path to spiritual illumination and closeness to God through the sacred act of remembrance. Ecstatic union in Sufism signifies the profound mystical experience of merging with the divine, where the individual self is utterly dissolved into the presence of God. This concept lies at the heart of Sufi mysticism, where the ultimate aspiration is to achieve an intimate, direct union with the divine essence. The experience is often described as a moment of transcendent love and divine intoxication, where the boundaries between the self and God vanish, leaving only pure unity and bliss. In Sufi teachings, the journey toward ecstatic union is not a linear or intellectual endeavor, but rather an inward spiritual pilgrimage that demands deep devotion, self-purification, and an absolute surrender to the will of God. It is a path marked by intense love, longing, and a burning desire to become one with the divine. The Sufi practitioner, through prayer, meditation, and acts of devotion, seeks to empty themselves of the ego and material distractions, in order to be filled with the love and presence of God. This process, known as tazkiyah, spiritual purification, involves the surrender of the lower self and its desires, allowing the soul to be refined and prepared for the experience of union. The experience of ecstatic union is often accompanied by a profound sense of joy, peace, and intoxication, wherein the seeker feels an overwhelming presence of the divine both within and around them. Sufi poets and mystics frequently describe this state in vivid, emotional terms, with renowned figures such as Rumi and Ibn Arabi articulating their ecstatic experiences in verses that celebrate divine love and union. For the Sufi, the experience of divine union is not simply a mental or spiritual state, but also an emotional and physical one, often marked by deep joy, and sometimes even tears of bliss. One of the central elements of ecstatic union is the concept of divine love, which in Sufism is seen as the force that draws the soul closer to God. The Sufi path is often described as a journey of love, where the heart becomes the primary organ of perception and connection with the divine. This love is not a fleeting emotion but a powerful transformative force that leads to the dissolution of the ego and the realization of God's presence in all aspects of existence. As the individual becomes more attuned to the divine, they begin to see the world through a lens of love, where every person, object, and moment reflects the sacred presence of God. The experience of ecstatic union also carries a communal aspect, as Sufis often gather in Dhikr, remembrance of God circles, where they chant the names of God in rhythmic repetition. These gatherings, which may also include dancing and music, are designed to induce a state of collective spiritual ecstasy, where participants, through their shared devotion and the power of divine love, experience a sense of unity, not only with God but with one another. This communal aspect underscores the interconnectedness of all beings in the divine plan, with the collective energy of worshippers amplifying the individual's connection to the divine. Ecstatic union in Sufism is not viewed as an isolated or self-serving experience, but rather as a gateway to greater service and love for humanity. Once the individual attains a sense of oneness with the divine, they are called to live in a way that reflects this unity through acts of kindness, generosity, and compassion. The realization of divine union compels the seeker to turn outward, sharing the love and grace they have received with the world around them, embodying the divine presence in every action and interaction. At its core, ecstatic union is a state of perfect love, unity, and surrender, where the individual transcends the ego and experiences the deepest connection with God. It is a mystical experience that transcends intellectual understanding, relying instead on the heart and soul's capacity to merge with the divine in a profound and transformative way. The concept of inner light in Quakerism embodies the direct and personal presence of God within each individual. This profound idea suggests that every human being is inherently connected to the divine, with a spark of divine presence residing deep within the soul. It is not an external or mediated experience but an internal, intimate awareness of God's guidance and truth. The inner light is often described as a form of divine illumination, accessible to all, irrespective of social status, education, or background, calling each person to seek a deeper understanding of both God and themselves. In Quaker belief, the inner light is far from being a passive or abstract concept. It is an active and transformative force. It compels individuals toward goodness, truth, and love, functioning as the internal voice of conscience. This guiding principle leads a person to act with compassion, justice, and integrity. The presence of this divine light fosters a personal and direct relationship with God, rendering the need for intermediaries or clergy unnecessary. In Quaker worship, for example, silence is maintained during gatherings with the belief that God speaks directly to each individual through their inner light, facilitating a communal yet deeply personal connection to the divine. The inner light also carries profound implications for social justice and equality. Quakers hold that because this divine presence exists equally within all people, every individual is deserving of dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, or social standing. The inner light calls Quakers to act as instruments of peace, advocating for equality, nonviolence, and the protection of the oppressed. It is a transformative and empowering concept, urging individuals to recognize the divine in others and to work toward creating a just and compassionate society. This belief in the inner light is foundational to the Quaker practice of silent worship, where individuals come together in silence with the understanding that the light can illuminate the hearts and minds of all present. Some may feel moved to speak during these meetings, sharing insights or messages they believe have been inspired by the divine. Others may remain silent, trusting that the inner light is still at work, guiding and speaking to each person in a unique way. The experience of the inner light, therefore, is not uniform or doctrinally prescribed. It is deeply personal, with each individual experiencing it in their own way. The inner light also invites a continual process of spiritual growth and discernment. Quakers view the presence of this divine light as a tool for self-examination and transformation. It calls individuals to reflect on their actions, thoughts, and intentions, fostering an ongoing commitment to live in alignment with the highest moral and ethical standards. This personal spiritual journey is characterized by openness to divine guidance and a willingness to evolve, becoming more attuned to the light within. At its core, the inner light in Quakerism serves as a powerful reminder that the divine is not distant or separate but resides within each person, ready to guide them toward truth and love. It nurtures a deep sense of individual responsibility to live according to divine principles while simultaneously fostering a profound sense of community, where all people are seen as equally worthy of divine guidance and care. Sophia, in Gnostic Christianity, embodies the personification of divine wisdom, manifesting as a female figure, whose presence bridges the transcendent and immanent realms of existence. This concept, which arises from the Gnostic tradition, reveals Sophia not as a mere metaphor or abstract principle, but as a potent and active force within the cosmos. Often regarded as the first emanation from the divine, Sophia is frequently described as the mother of all things, or the wisdom of God, playing an essential role in the unfolding of creation and the salvation of humanity. She exists within a theological framework wherein the unknowable God, referred to as the monad or the One, expresses itself through a series of emanations that give rise to all of reality. Sophia's story within Gnostic thought is both complex and paradoxical. She is depicted as a being who, in her fervent longing for union with the divine, inadvertently creates a flawed or incomplete world. This fall is a pivotal narrative in many Gnostic texts, where Sophia's desire to know the unknowable source of all existence leads her to generate a world that, though filled with divine potential, is distant from its original purity and intention. Her act of creation, viewed as an error in Gnostic theology, introduces imperfection into the world, yet it is precisely through this imperfection that the possibility of redemption emerges. The fall of Sophia is not understood as a purely negative event, but as part of a larger cosmic drama that sets the stage for the ultimate redemption of creation. Her error creates a rupture in the divine order, but through this very disruption, Sophia becomes an instrumental figure in the Gnostic narrative of salvation. In this framework, the soul's journey involves awakening to the truth of Sophia's wisdom, and ultimately transcending the material world she helped bring into existence. Thus, Sophia is both the origin of the world's imperfection and the guiding force that leads humanity back toward its divine origin. In many Gnostic traditions, Sophia is closely associated with the Holy Spirit or the feminine aspect of God. She is the one who imparts divine knowledge to humanity, guiding souls toward spiritual enlightenment and the recollection of their true nature. As a figure of profound compassion, mercy, and insight, Sophia offers the path to Gnosis, the direct experiential knowledge of the divine, which leads to liberation from the confines of the material world and a return to the divine source. Her wisdom is not merely intellectual. It is deeply intertwined with an intuitive experiential knowing that transcends ordinary human understanding. Sophia's personification emphasizes the Gnostic vision that the divine is not distant or impersonal, but can be encountered through wisdom, which in Gnostic thought is a deeply personal and transformative experience. She becomes a guiding force, not only within the cosmic drama of creation and redemption, but also within the individual's journey towards self-realization and spiritual awakening. Her wisdom is the key to overcoming the ignorance that binds the soul to the material world, and to achieving union with the divine source from which all existence emanates. In this context, Sophia stands as both a symbol and a force of divine wisdom, bridging the gap between humanity and the divine. She encapsulates the paradox of creation and redemption, illustrating how the journey through imperfection is, in fact, part of a larger divine plan for the restoration of both the soul and the universe. to their original perfect state. The Sephirot in Kabbalah represent the 10 divine emanations or attributes, through which the infinite and boundless will of God is channeled into the fabric of creation. These 10 attributes are not mere abstract ideas. Rather, they serve as the fundamental structures by which divine energy flows into the world, allowing the ineffable and transcendent God to manifest in a form that is perceivable and approachable by creation. Each Sephirot functions as a channel for a distinct aspect of God's nature, and each is intricately interwoven with the others, creating a dynamic living system that mirrors the divine order of the cosmos. This interrelationship among the Sephirot reflects a profound cosmic harmony, and their pattern of arrangement forms the tree of life, a symbolic representation of the continuous flow of divine energy and its intricate structure. At the apex of the tree of life lies Keter, the crown of divine will, from which all other emanations spring forth. Keter is associated with pure, undifferentiated divine consciousness, the point where the unknowable, infinite God comes closest to the finite world. Beneath Keter, 2 Sephirot, Chokmah, wisdom, and Bina, understanding, form the intellectual foundation of creation. Chokmah embodies the initial divine spark, the impulse of creation, the moment of insight, while Bina represents the process of contemplation and analysis that refines and structures this spark into a coherent, tangible understanding. Together, these two principles create the framework for divine thought, unfolding into progressively clearer forms of understanding. Descending further, the next 7 Sephirot embody the emotional attributes of God, through which the divine will is further expressed and made manifest in the world. Chesed, kindness, and Gevurah, severity, represent the dynamic balance between unconditional love and divine justice. Chesed pours out boundless blessings, while Gevurah brings necessary limitations and discipline to maintain cosmic order. These two opposing forces are harmonized by Teferet, the emanation of beauty, harmony, and balance, which reconciles the apparent contradiction between Chesed and Gevurah, aligning them with the divine purpose. Further along, Netzik, eternity, and Had, glory, are the active, forward-moving forces that propel divine energy into action and communication. Netzik embodies endurance and victory, while Had represents humility and the glory of divine expression. Together, these forces maintain the momentum of divine purpose across time and space. At the base of the tree, Yesod foundation serves as the bridge between the spiritual and material worlds, channeling the energies of the higher Sephirot into physical manifestation. It is through Yesod that the divine presence moves from the realm of pure ideas into the tangible experience of creation. Finally, at the base of the tree is Malkut, sovereignty, which represents the divine presence as it is expressed in the world of action and experience. Malkut is the most outwardly manifested of the Sephirot, where the full realization of divine will is made manifest. Malkut is sometimes associated with the Shekinah, the immanent aspect of God that dwells among creation. It is through Malkut that the entire structure of the Sephirot returns to its source in Keter, creating a cyclical flow of divine energy that unites all aspects of creation and re-establishes the connection between the finite and the infinite. The Sephirot are not isolated or static but exist in a constant state of interaction and balance, with each emanation flowing into and influencing the others. This interconnected web of divine attributes forms a living, dynamic system through which the divine will continuously sustains and shapes creation. The study and contemplation of the Sephirot, and their relationships with one another, lie at the heart of Kabbalistic practice. It provides a framework for understanding how God interacts with the world and offers a pathway for spiritual ascent. Through the study of the Sephirot, practitioners seek to align their own consciousness with the divine flow, enabling them to participate consciously in the ongoing process of creation and transformation, as they ascend through the divine emanations toward greater unity with the Source. Tikkun Olam, in Jewish mysticism, expresses the profound vision that the world exists in a state of spiritual incompletion, and that human beings are divinely tasked with its restoration and healing. Rooted in Lurianic Kabbalah, this concept originates from the mythic account of Shivarat HaKalim, the shattering of the vessels. According to this cosmology, when the divine sought to emanate light into creation, the vessels designed to receive that light were too fragile, and they shattered, scattering sparks of holiness throughout the material world. This primordial rupture introduced fragmentation, exile, and concealment into the structure of existence. The sacred task of humanity, is to gather and elevate these sparks through intentional action, ethical living, and spiritual devotion, acts that restore divine harmony and contribute to the cosmic repair of the world. In this mystical framework, the everyday is re-enchanted. Seemingly ordinary actions become cosmic interventions, as human life is transformed into a field of spiritual activity. Tikkun Olam is not merely a call to social justice or moral repair, though it has taken on those meanings in modern Jewish discourse, but a deeply metaphysical vision. The physical world is saturated with divine remnants, hidden and waiting to be raised. When a person performs a mitzvah, a commandment, with pure intention kavana, the act becomes an instrument of tikkun, lifting the concealed sparks and realigning them with their divine origin. In doing so, the boundary between sacred and profane is bridged, and a fragment of the primordial unity is restored. The shattered vessels are not only a symbol of cosmic disorder, but also reflect the brokenness within the human soul and the structures of society. The work of tikkun is thus both personal and collective, requiring the engagement of each soul, each of which is said to hold a unique share in the cosmic task. This is not a merely restorative process, it is creative, allowing human beings to co-participate in divine evolution. God is not a distant observer in this unfolding, but a responsive presence, drawing near as humanity chooses to align its will with the deeper rhythms of creation. Through study, prayer, ethical action, and conscious awareness, the individual contributes not only to the mending of the world, but to the healing of the divine presence itself, the Shekinah, which in Kabbalistic thought has become partially exiled or hidden in the world of multiplicity and concealment. In this mystical ecology, every act of justice, kindness or mindfulness, becomes a lever that shifts the cosmos toward redemption. The scattered sparks begin to glow in unison, and the world moves incrementally closer to its healed state, a state not of perfection as stasis, but of dynamic wholeness. Tikkun Olam reimagines the human being not as a passive vessel of divine will, but as a co-creator, a sacred agent charged with the holy labor of reintegration. This process is intergenerational, unfolding slowly across time, summoning each soul to awaken to its hidden purpose. Through this sacred work, spirit and matter are no longer estranged, but become mirrors of their shared divine origin. The infinite Ein Sof, whose light once scattered, is destined to be made whole again. Nous, in Neoplatonism, is the divine intellect, the first emanation from the ineffable source, known as the One. It represents a realm of pure thought and archetypal order that underlies all of reality. Far from being a mere abstraction, Nous is a living principle of cosmic structure, containing within itself the eternal forms or ideas, the perfect intelligible patterns that serve as the blueprint for everything that exists in the sensible world. In the Neoplatonic metaphysical hierarchy, the One remains absolutely simple, beyond comprehension and division. Nous emerges as its immediate self-reflection, unified yet capable of multiplicity. Through its eternal self-contemplation of the One, Nous generates the intelligible cosmos, a non-material world beyond space and time, filled with pure forms that give meaning, order and coherence to the visible realm. In this vision, thinking and being are one within Nous. To think is to be, and to be is to think. The ideas within Nous are not thoughts about things, but the very realities themselves, existing immutably and incorruptibly. Thus, Nous is both the cause of all that is, and the structure through which all things become intelligible. It serves as the bridge between the utter simplicity of the One and the multiplicity of the natural world. Through contemplation of Nous, the human soul can ascend toward truth, not by acquiring information, but by recollecting its divine origin and aligning itself with the eternal patterns from which it was formed. This ascent is not merely intellectual, it is spiritual, for to know Nous is to participate in it, and to awaken to a mode of existence where dualities dissolve into unity. Plotinus and later Neoplatonists described Nous as radiant with self-awareness, suffused with intelligible light. Each form within it is a perfect, undivided expression of the One's inexhaustible depth. Multiplicity exists within Nous, not as fragmentation, but as differentiated unity. It transcends material limitation, generating diversity while preserving coherence. In its contemplation of the One, Nous does not depart from its source, rather it sustains its own being through continuous vision, much like a mirror that reflects without distortion. This contemplative act is not passive, but creative. From Nous arises the world's soul, and from the world's soul the physical cosmos. This cascade of being ensures that each level bears the imprint of its source, while possessing its own proper mode of existence. To engage with Nous is to undertake an act of philosophical and spiritual transformation. The goal is not to impose artificial categories upon the world, but to perceive reality as an expression of divine order. The properly trained mind becomes not a private faculty, but a window into the structure of the cosmos. Through dialectic, meditation and purification, the soul ascends beyond opinion and sense perception, awakening to the vision of Nous, whose truths are eternal, incorruptible, and unerring. This vision brings not only knowledge but serenity, for it aligns the human soul with a timeless and luminous order, where everything is intelligible, coherent, and good. From this perspective, the cosmos is not a random collection of material elements, but a living manifestation of divine thought, ordered from above and rich with meaning. For those who learn to see with the eye of the soul, rather than the eye of the flesh, reality is revealed as a reflection of Nous, the eternal mind that both contains and sustains the intelligible and sensible worlds. Apokatastasis, in early Christian mysticism, is a theological vision of profound cosmic hope, a belief that, at the end of all time, there will be a complete restoration of all things to their original divine harmony. This is not merely the salvation of individual souls, but the redemption and reintegration of the entire created order from fragmentation, corruption, and death, back into unity with God. Rooted in scriptural references such as the restoration of all things, Acts 3:21, this concept found its most influential articulation in the writings of Origen of Alexandria, who envisioned a divine plan so vast and merciful that no being would be excluded from its redemptive reach. Even the most fallen spirits and estranged creatures, according to this view, will ultimately be reconciled to their divine source, not by force, but through the gentle transformative power of divine love and truth. In this mystical schema, time is not a space of judgment alone, but a stage for healing and return. History, with all its sufferings, contradictions, and apparent defeats, is not discarded but drawn forward toward a divinely intended telos, a consummation in which the meaning of every fracture is gathered into a higher coherence. The process of Apokatastasis does not override free will, but works through it. Even the most hardened heart, in the fullness of eternity, may awaken to the light and turn freely toward the good. What appears as judgment or consequence in temporal experience is thus reinterpreted, not as endless punishment, but as purification, a crucible through which the soul is refined and brought back into deeper awareness and union with God. This vision does not minimize the moral seriousness of earthly life, nor does it deny the real presence of suffering or evil. Rather, it frames these realities within a larger divine economy, where nothing is wasted, and where even the darkest moments can serve as pathways to illumination. The cosmos, in this light, is not a dualistic battleground, but a living whole, destined for harmony under the patient guidance of divine wisdom and mercy. The radical inclusivity of Apokatastasis provoked controversy in its time, particularly among those who feared it compromised justice or the urgency of repentance. Yet for mystics and theologians drawn to the fathomless depth of divine compassion, it offered a vision in which love is not overcome by resistance, but eternally overcomes all resistance. Within this framework, the final state of existence is not a static paradise, but a dynamic participation in divine life, a realm where freedom and unity coexist, and where every soul returns not to obliteration, but to the fullness of its unique being. This restored communion transcends isolation while honoring each soul's distinct expression of the divine image. The very fabric of creation, according to this hope, is woven with the intention of restoration, and the divine will does not rest until all have come home. In this eschatological vision, justice and mercy are no longer in tension, but are transfigured into a harmony beyond retribution, a healing so complete that even the faintest echoes of alienation are drawn back into the eternal song of unity and light. Logos. Across the intertwined traditions of Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, and Christianity, represents a profound and multi-layered concept of divine reason or cosmic order, a mediating principle that bridges the infinite and the finite, the unchanging source and the ever-changing world of phenomena. It is far more than mere speech or word. Logos is the foundational principle of coherence, intelligibility, and structure that underlies the very fabric of reality. In Gnostic thought, the Logos emerges as an emanation from the ineffable source, the monad, a divine intermediary through which the hidden God reveals aspects of the divine pleroma, the fullness of spiritual reality. The Logos serves both as a salvific force and as a metaphysical ordering agent, guiding souls trapped in the illusion and fragmentation of the material world back toward gnosis, or spiritual knowledge. It reveals the divine spark within, illuminating the path back to the fullness from which the soul originated. In Neoplatonism, the Logos arises necessarily from the One, the absolute and undivided source of all being. The Logos is not separate from the One, but is its rational expression, the divine intellect through which multiplicity flows from unity. Acting as the source of the world soul and the ordered cosmos, the Logos imparts structure, purpose, and intelligibility at every level of existence. This is not a creation in time, but a metaphysical emanation, in which the Logos becomes the rational pattern inscribed in all things, allowing human reason to mirror the divine order. Christian theology adopts and transforms this philosophical lineage, especially through the Gospel of John, which begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In this context, the Logos is not only divine reason but also a personal presence, the eternal Word incarnate in Jesus Christ. He is the Logos made flesh, through whom all things were created and in whom ultimate truth, life, and redemption are found. Christianity thus unites metaphysics with history. The abstract Logos becomes a person who enters time to heal and restore the brokenness of the human condition. This convergence across traditions portrays the Logos as the axis through which transcendence becomes immanent, allowing the eternal to engage with the temporal without diminishing its essence. The Logos is simultaneously the blueprint of creation, the revealer of divine knowledge, and the path to spiritual reintegration. Through contemplation, reason, and spiritual discipline, the human soul can attune itself to the Logos, tracing its way back through the manifold expressions of reality, to the primal unity from which all things flow. Moreover, the concept of Logos affirms a deep metaphysical optimism. It asserts that the cosmos is not governed by chaos or accident, but by an intelligible and meaningful order. Even in suffering or disorder, the presence of the Logos ensures that meaning is not absent but hidden, awaiting revelation to those who seek. In Gnostic systems, where the material world is often viewed as flawed or even malevolent, the Logos remains a beacon of divine truth, capable of awakening the soul to its origin, purpose, and ultimate liberation from ignorance. Viewed in this light, the Logos is not a passive structure but an active, dynamic force. It calls forth order from potential, illuminates the intellect, and bridges the gap between thought and being. It is both immanent in creation and transcendent in origin, both the rational foundation of the cosmos and the personal presence that engages human hearts. Across these traditions, the Logos serves as a reminder that existence is not random or devoid of meaning, but shaped by a divine pattern that invites recognition, reverence, and response. The Logos is that by which the cosmos speaks, that by which the soul hears, and that through which understanding dawns as light in the darkness. And Sof, in Kabbalah, refers to the infinite, unknowable aspect of God, a concept that transcends the limits of human understanding and experience. This mystical notion represents the boundless and limitless nature of the divine, existing beyond all forms of conceptualization or finite definition. The term Ein Sof translates to without end, signifying a reality unbounded by time, space, or form. It is a state of pure potentiality, untouched by the constraints that govern both the material and spiritual realms, where the divine remains unmanifested and undefined. In Kabbalistic thought, Ein Sof is the primordial source of all creation, the origin from which everything emanates, yet it remains utterly inaccessible to human perception. It is the absolute, infinite foundation from which all divine forces flow, but it cannot be directly comprehended, for to define or understand Ein Sof would be to impose limits upon that which is by nature limitless. This unknowability is not an absence or void, but a fullness, a potentiality that contains all things in their most abstract and undifferentiated form, cloaked in mystery and beyond grasp. This infinite aspect of God embodies the paradox of divinity itself. God as both transcendent and immanent, simultaneously beyond the world and present within it. Ein Sof is often described as a state of perfect unity, where the multiplicity of creation has not yet been differentiated or expressed. It is a condition before time, space, or form, a realm beyond dualities, beyond the traditional distinctions of being and non-being. To contemplate Ein Sof is to encounter a reality in which all distinctions dissolve and only pure, unfathomable existence remains. In the Kabbalistic system, creation unfolds through a process of emanation from Ein Sof, beginning with the divine light known as Or Ein Sof, light of the infinite. This light undergoes a series of gradations or stages, each one introducing a greater degree of limitation and structure. Through this gradual unfolding, the unmanifest potential of Ein Sof becomes increasingly concrete, culminating in the formation of the physical world with all its diversity, boundaries, and temporal nature. Despite initiating this process of emanation, Ein Sof remains completely untouched and unknowable. The divine light that flows from it, though manifest in the world, is still considered an extension or reflection of the infinite, preserving an essential connection to its origin. The enduring mystery of Ein Sof underscores the idea that the divine is both the source and ultimate destiny of all creation, always present, yet forever beyond human comprehension. It challenges the very notion of knowing or defining God. The concept of Ein Sof carries profound implications for human spirituality within Kabbalah. To seek Ein Sof is to pursue the infinite aspect of the divine, entering a space where the limitations of human knowledge give way to awe, humility, and reverence. It invites the spiritual seeker to acknowledge the mystery of the divine not as a problem to be solved, but as a sacred presence to be approached in silence and wonder. This unknowability fosters a deep sense of spiritual awe. It reminds the practitioner that no matter how far one progresses on the spiritual path, the divine remains infinitely vast, always beyond reach yet intimately present. This paradox of the hidden and revealed aspects of God encourages a devotional attitude rooted in reverence rather than intellectual mastery. In this way, Ein Sof serves as both a mystery and a wellspring of spiritual inspiration. It calls the seeker to recognize the limitless potential of the divine, even while accepting that such potential will never be fully understood. Through humility, contemplation, and ongoing spiritual growth, one may draw closer to the infinite, not by grasping it, but by revering it. From this reverence emerges the possibility of spiritual union, a communion born not of knowledge, but of awe. Kamidana and Kami are integral concepts in Shinto, where the sacred and the everyday world intersect within the home and the natural environment. Kamidana, often translated as household altars, serve as focal points for reverence, creating a space within the home where the divine presence is honored and invited into daily life. These small altars typically feature representations of Kami, the spirits or deities that embody natural forces, ancestral spirits, and various other aspects of the divine realm. Kami are not abstract, distant beings but are deeply immanent in the world, with each Kami believed to reside in specific natural objects or phenomena, such as trees, rivers, mountains, or even specific locations in a community. The Kamidana serves as a means of establishing a direct and personal connection with these divine forces, bringing the sacred into the home and creating a space for daily rituals, prayers, and offerings. The altar is typically placed in a clean, high, and prominent location, symbolizing the respect and reverence given to the divine. The worship at Kamidana may involve offerings of food, incense, and prayers, through which individuals and families invite blessings, protection, and guidance from the Kami. The act of tending to the Kamidana becomes a means of cultivating an ongoing relationship with the divine, one that nurtures spiritual awareness in everyday life. Kami in Shinto represent a broad array of spiritual forces, each with its own distinct qualities and influence. These spirits are not only deities in the traditional sense, but also include the sacred essence of nature itself, making every aspect of the natural world a potential vessel for divine presence. Trees, rocks, mountains, rivers, and even certain animals may be inhabited by Kami, making nature a sacred space filled with divine energy. Each Kami is believed to have its own personality, characteristics, and influence, which can range from protective and benevolent to vengeful, depending on the context and the relationship with humans. The practice of honoring kami through the Kamidana reflects the Shinto understanding that the spiritual and natural realms are not separate but interconnected. Every object, every living being, and every event is infused with divine energy, and it is through the recognition of this energy that harmony is maintained between the human world and the world of kami. The kami's influence is considered essential for maintaining the health and prosperity of individuals, families, and communities. And it is through rituals at the Kamidana that people seek to invite the blessings of these spirits into their lives. The presence of kami within the home is a constant reminder of the sacredness of life and the need to live in accordance with the natural world. To honor the kami is to honor the interconnectedness of all things, from the smallest creature to the largest mountain. This belief calls for a life lived with respect, gratitude, and awareness, recognizing the divine in both the grand and the ordinary elements of existence. The Kamidana, therefore, becomes a center for fostering a sense of peace, balance, and spiritual reflection within the home, offering a space for families to align themselves with the sacred forces of nature. Moreover, the Kamidana encourages personal responsibility for maintaining harmony within the household and in one's relationship with nature. Through rituals and offerings, individuals are reminded of their role as caretakers not only of their home and family, but also of the broader environment in which they live. Honoring the kami through these household altars cultivates mindfulness of the divine presence that is always around, waiting to be acknowledged and revered. In this way, Kamidana and kami represent a deeply personal and familial connection to the divine, where the natural world and spiritual realms converge within the everyday fabric of life. It is through these practices that Shinto offers a path to spiritual fulfillment, where the sacred is not distant or isolated but present in every moment, every action, and every interaction with the world around us. Kana, in Shinto, refers to the gentle divine power that resides within natural things, embodying the belief that the divine is immanent in the natural world. This concept speaks to the sacredness of all elements in nature, where everything from mountains and rivers to trees, rocks, and even the wind is imbued with a spiritual essence. These natural phenomena are not seen as mere physical objects, but as manifestations of divine presence, with each element possessing its own unique form of sacred energy that connects the material world to the spiritual realm. In Shinto, Kana emphasizes the interconnectedness between humans and the environment, proposing that nature itself is a reflection of divine order and beauty. The idea suggests that the divine power is not something distant or removed from the world, but something that is actively present in the living, breathing world around us. Every flower, every stone, and every stream is an expression of the divine, inviting people to recognize and honor the sanctity of the natural world. This recognition fosters a deep respect for nature, encouraging humans to live in harmony with their surroundings, seeing nature not as a resource to be exploited, but as a sacred partner in the cycle of life. This divine presence in nature is also deeply personal, as it is believed that Kana can influence the lives of individuals by guiding, protecting, or inspiring them. It is not an abstract, impersonal force but a gentle and intimate power that speaks to the human soul and spirit. This means that the natural world, with all its beauty and mystery, is constantly communicating with people, inviting them to attune themselves to the divine presence that resides in every corner of the earth. The practice of Kana in Shinto is often expressed through rituals, offerings, and ceremonies that honor the spirits of nature and invite their blessings. These rituals are simple but deeply meaningful, reflecting an awareness of the sacred in the everyday. By offering respect to trees, mountains, and rivers, practitioners acknowledge the divine power present within them, seeking to cultivate a relationship of mutual reverence and gratitude. This recognition of Kana encourages a spirit of humility, where humans understand their place within the vast, interconnected web of life. Kana also highlights the dynamic and ever-changing nature of the divine in Shinto. It is not a static or fixed power, but one that moves and evolves in response to the flow of life itself, which mirrors the cycles of nature, seasonal changes, the ebb and flow of rivers, the growth and decay of plants, and the passage of time. This idea of fluidity invites people to approach life with a sense of openness and adaptability, understanding that the divine is not a fixed entity but a living, breathing presence that moves with the rhythm of the world. In this way, Kana serves as a reminder that the divine is not confined to temples or shrines, but is woven into the very fabric of existence. The presence of Kana in natural things encourages people to find spirituality in the simple, everyday experiences of life, to seek divinity in the smallest moments of connection with the world around them. It is a call to see the sacred in the ordinary, and to honor the divine power that sustains the world's beauty and balance. Through acts of reverence, mindfulness, and care for nature, people can align themselves with the gentle but profound power of Kana that flows through all living things. Shen, in Chinese folk religion, refers to the spirits or deities that are believed to influence the world and govern various aspects of life and nature. These spirits are integral to the cosmological structure, acting as intermediaries between the human realm and the divine order. They can be associated with natural forces, ancestors, or specific functions within society, such as wealth, health, or protection. The concept of Shen highlights a dynamic and interactive relationship between the physical world and a spiritual realm, where divine powers actively shape human experiences and environments. In traditional Chinese belief systems, Shen are not distant or abstract entities, but are deeply entwined with everyday life. They are seen as forces that can either bring blessings or impose misfortune, depending on how humans interact with them. Offerings, prayers, and rituals are conducted to honor and appease these spirits, ensuring their favor and protection. These rituals are not only acts of devotion, but also a means to maintain harmony with the spiritual forces that influence the cycles of nature and human existence. The classification of Shen can be diverse, encompassing a wide range of deities or spirits. Some are revered as major gods associated with specific aspects of life, such as the gods of wealth, wisdom, or war, while others may be local spirits or ancestral deities, each holding a specific role or influence over a family, village, or even a particular profession. The Shen are often invoked for guidance, blessings, or assistance in various endeavors, with people turning to them in times of need or crisis to seek their intercession. The belief in Shen reflects a broader view of the universe, where everything, human beings, nature, and even inanimate objects, can possess a spiritual essence. This animistic worldview suggests that the world is imbued with divine presence, and that humans are constantly in interaction with the unseen forces of the universe. Shen are seen as active participants in the flow of life, shaping events, destinies, and personal fortunes. They are believed to influence everything from the harvest to the success of an individual's endeavors, the health of a family, and even the fate of entire communities. Additionally, the concept of Shen acknowledges the importance of ancestor worship, as deceased family members are often honored and invoked as ancestral spirits, or ancestral Shen, who continue to guide and protect their descendants. These ancestral spirits are seen as important protectors and advisors, and their continued favor is sought through rituals that express respect, remembrance, and devotion. The reverence for ancestors underscores the belief in a continuous cycle of life, death, and spiritual presence that transcends the physical realm. Shen also embody a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of the spiritual and material worlds. The belief system suggests that the actions of humans can influence the spirits, just as the spirits can impact human affairs. This reciprocal relationship between humans and Shen is central to the practice of Chinese folk religion, where individuals not only seek divine aid, but also understand their responsibility to live in harmony with the forces around them, fulfilling their duties to both the gods and the community. Thus, Shen, as spirits or deities influencing the world, form an essential part of the Chinese spiritual landscape. Their presence and influence are felt in every aspect of life, from daily routines to major life events, and their role in the spiritual ecology of the world is a reminder of the interconnectedness between humanity and the divine. These spirits are revered, respected, and invoked with a sense of reciprocity, as people seek to align themselves with the divine forces that guide the world and ensure its harmony. Ubuntu, a concept deeply rooted in African spirituality, is encapsulated in the phrase "I am because we are," reflecting a profound understanding of collective humanity and interconnectedness. It is a worldview that places emphasis on the communal nature of existence, suggesting that individual identity and well-being are intrinsically linked to the well-being of others in the community. Rather than viewing the self as separate or isolated, Ubuntu proposes that one's humanity is defined and realized through relationships and shared experiences with others. This interconnectedness creates a moral and social framework that encourages empathy, mutual respect, and cooperation, recognizing that personal success or failure cannot be fully understood without considering its impact on the wider community. At its core, Ubuntu acknowledges that human beings are not solitary creatures, but part of a larger dynamic network of relationships that transcend individual lives. The phrase "I am because we are" speaks to the idea that a person's identity is only fully realized in the context of the community. From the moment of birth, one is shaped by the collective wisdom, traditions, and values of the group. The individual is never fully alone, and their actions, whether positive or negative, resonate within the communal spirit. This emphasizes a deep sense of responsibility not only to oneself but to the others around, recognizing that personal flourishing and social harmony are bound together. The principle of Ubuntu calls for an ethical commitment to humanity that emphasizes compassion, kindness, and respect for others. Each individual is encouraged to live with a sense of duty toward the community, understanding that by supporting and uplifting others, they are also nurturing their own humanity. It is a call for generosity, where the success of one is seen as the success of all, and the failure or suffering of one is felt by the whole group. Ubuntu thus fosters a spirit of solidarity, a sense of shared purpose and collective progress that transcends individual desires or ambitions. In this worldview, actions that promote unity, healing, and social harmony are viewed as inherently valuable. Those who embody Ubuntu are seen as deeply attuned to the needs of others, often placing the welfare of the community above personal gain. Through acts of service, sacrifice, and cooperation, the Ubuntu philosophy strengthens the fabric of society, creating a collective identity where every member, regardless of their role, is seen as essential to the whole. The interconnectedness inherent in Ubuntu encourages people to listen to one another, to respect differences, and to work together toward the common good, recognizing that the strength of the community lies in the strength of its members. Ubuntu is also an invitation to embrace the idea that the humanity of others is as important as one's own. It challenges notions of self-centeredness or individualism, proposing instead that personal fulfillment is best achieved through shared experiences and collective action. The concept fosters an environment where mutual care, responsibility, and empathy are not merely moral imperatives, but are seen as foundational elements of a well-functioning and thriving society. Through Ubuntu, a sense of community extends beyond mere proximity or association. It becomes a shared spiritual and ethical responsibility that holds together the threads of society as a whole. The principle encourages individuals to live with awareness of the impact of their actions on others, and to act in ways that cultivate unity, compassion, and mutual respect. Ubuntu creates a framework where each person's dignity is valued and upheld, not as an isolated entity but as part of the collective human family. Animism, found in various indigenous religions, is the belief that all entities, whether living or non-living, possess a spiritual essence, a sacred life force that transcends the physical world. This worldview sees the natural environment not merely as a backdrop for human activity, but as an interconnected web of spiritual beings, each with its own consciousness, agency, and importance. Trees, animals, rivers, mountains, rocks, and even weather patterns are imbued with a life force that is as real and significant as the human soul itself. Each element of nature is seen as possessing its own spirit, often with its own needs, desires, and intentions, making the relationship between humans and the natural world one of profound mutual respect and balance. In animistic thought, the world is far from inert or passive. It is an animated cosmos, alive with spiritual power that must be understood, honored, and respected. The idea that even inanimate objects possess spirit radically shifts the way the world is perceived, dissolving the separation between the sacred and the mundane. Humans are not separate from nature, but are intricately woven into the fabric of the spiritual world, where every interaction with the environment holds potential for spiritual exchange. Animism emphasizes the importance of these relationships, suggesting that people are stewards and participants in a larger, more complex spiritual ecology, where every being, human or non-human, plays a crucial role in maintaining the harmony of the world. This belief extends beyond the visible world of living creatures to include the forces of nature, like wind, rain, and fire, as well as places, such as mountains or forests, that are considered sacred because they are inhabited by powerful spirits or ancestral presences. In some traditions, the land itself is considered to be alive and capable of communication, and the actions of the people can influence its health and vitality. Rituals, offerings, and prayers are common practices aimed at maintaining a harmonious relationship with these spirits, ensuring that they are appeased, respected, and kept in balance. The animistic perspective also emphasizes the idea of interconnectedness, where everything is related and part of a vast spiritual network. No entity exists in isolation. All things influence and are influenced by one another. Human beings, therefore, are not seen as the masters of nature but as cohabitants, guided by the knowledge that all entities, human, animal, plant, and geological, are deserving of respect and care. This principle fosters a sense of responsibility toward the environment and encourages sustainable practices, as every action is believed to affect the spiritual equilibrium of the world. In the animistic worldview, the boundaries between human and non-human are fluid. Humans are seen as part of the same spiritual continuum that connects all beings. The teachings of animism are often passed down through oral traditions, where stories of animals, plants, and natural elements serve as lessons on how to live in harmony with the world's spiritual essence. These stories are rich with symbolic meaning and are designed to reinforce respect for the spirits that inhabit the earth, teaching people how to navigate their relationships with both visible and invisible forces. This spiritual connection between all things is not only an intellectual belief, but an experiential reality. In animistic practices, individuals often engage in rituals, ceremonies, and meditations that allow them to communicate with the spirits of the land, animals, and natural forces. Through drumming, dance, fasting, or other acts of devotion, people seek to establish or maintain these spiritual ties, listening to the wisdom that the world offers. These practices are not only acts of religious devotion, but are seen as necessary for the maintenance of balance in both the individual's life and in the broader cosmic order. Thus, animism offers a rich and deeply rooted understanding of the world as a spiritual place, where the visible and invisible are inseparable, where every element of creation is honored, and where humans are called to live in reciprocal relationship with the spirits that inhabit all things. It is a belief system that calls for reverence, humility, and deep respect for the interconnected web of life, understanding that each entity, from the smallest pebble to the grandest mountain, holds sacred significance in the tapestry of existence. Tapu in Polynesian religion is the concept of sacredness that both protects and forbids, a powerful and pervasive force that governs the boundaries between the sacred and the profane. It is not merely a state of holiness, but a dynamic and active force that imbues certain people, places, objects, and practices with a sacred power that must be respected and preserved. Tapu creates a realm of spiritual protection, ensuring that certain things are kept in their rightful place, untainted by human interference or desecration. It is a force that defines boundaries and imposes restrictions, safeguarding the integrity of the sacred while maintaining harmony in the world. To be in a state of tapu is to be set apart, to possess a sanctity that demands reverence and care. This sacredness can extend to individuals, such as chiefs or priests who carry a divine authority and are considered imbued with tapu, marking them as embodiments of spiritual power. Similarly, places like temples, burial grounds, and certain natural sites, such as mountains, rivers, and forests, are considered tapu, their spiritual essence requiring protection from desecration or disrespect. These sacred sites are often seen as embodiments of ancestral spirits, or as the dwelling places of gods, and their sanctity must be maintained through ritual practices, offerings, and strict taboos. Tapu is not a static concept. It is deeply tied to the spiritual and social order of the community. It functions as both a protective force and a moral guideline, establishing what is permissible and what is forbidden in relation to the sacred. Those who violate the principles of tapu are believed to incur spiritual harm, which could lead to misfortune or punishment. This ensures that the balance between the sacred and the everyday is maintained, and that spiritual well-being is protected for the community and the individual. The concept of tapu is also intricately linked to mana, the the spiritual power or force that flows through the world in Polynesian belief. While Tapu imposes restrictions, Mana is the force that empowers these restrictions, making certain places or objects not only sacred but potent with spiritual authority. Together, Tapu and Mana help to structure the world in such a way that spiritual integrity and human social order are preserved. Tapu thus ensures that those who possess or are connected to sacred things do so with responsibility, humility, and respect for the spiritual power they hold. Tapu is not simply about prohibition, however. It is also about honoring and maintaining the sanctity of the natural and spiritual world. By observing the rules of Tapu, individuals affirm their connection to the sacred and their respect for the forces that govern existence. Rituals, ceremonies, and daily practices are infused with an awareness of Tapu, ensuring that the community remains in harmony with both the divine and the earthly realms. In this way, Tapu acts as a constant reminder of the need to live in alignment with the sacred laws that govern all aspects of life. Moreover, Tapu is not always permanent. It can be lifted or transferred, but such actions must be done with great care and through proper ritualistic processes to prevent spiritual disruption. When Tapu is lifted from a place or person, the change must be recognized and respected by the community, and it is often marked by specific rites or ceremonies to ensure that the flow of spiritual power remains intact and in harmony with the natural world. Through Tapu, Polynesian spirituality emphasizes the delicate balance between the sacred and the everyday, teaching that all aspects of life, from the smallest task to the most significant ritual, are intertwined with spiritual meaning and responsibility. This sacredness is not merely an abstract idea but a living, breathing force that shapes the physical world, guiding people to act with reverence, caution, and care in their interactions with the sacred, the divine, and the natural world around them. Wakan Tanka in Lakota spirituality is the great mystery, the all-encompassing, ineffable spirit that is the source and essence of all existence. It is not a singular deity in the conventional sense, but rather the supreme force that permeates the entire universe, embodying both the visible and invisible, the known and the unknown. Wakan Tanka is both transcendent and immanent, existing beyond human comprehension while simultaneously present in every aspect of life, shaping the land, guiding the people, and sustaining all living beings with its sacred energy. This divine mystery is the pulse of life, the breath of the world, the guiding presence behind every event, moment, and cycle that unfolds. In Lakota thought, Wakan Tanka is not distant or removed from the world, but intimately involved in the workings of nature and the daily lives of the people. Its presence is felt in the wind that whispers through the trees, in the fire that warms the hearth, in the river that nourishes the land, and in the hearts of those who walk the earth. Each element of nature is seen as a manifestation of Wakan Tanka, and each has its own spirit and purpose, all contributing to the harmonious balance of the world. To walk in balance with Wakan Tanka is to live in harmony with all things, to recognize the sacredness of every part of creation, and to honor the interconnectedness of life. This concept of the great mystery invites a deep humility, for Wakan Tanka is beyond the full understanding of human beings. It calls on individuals to acknowledge their limitations and to surrender to the mystery of existence itself. While the Lakota have many ways of engaging with Wakan Tanka, through prayer, ceremony, songs, and dreams, the understanding of this spirit is always held in reverence as a presence that transcends the human ego and connects people to the vastness of the cosmos. Rituals and practices in Lakota spirituality are ways to honor and align oneself with Wakan Tanka, seeking guidance, wisdom, and strength from the great mystery. In this worldview, Wakan Tanka is the source of moral order and spiritual law, the foundation upon which all relationships are built, between human beings, between humanity and nature, and between the visible and invisible worlds. To live in accordance with Wakan Tanka is to live in respect, kindness, humility, and balance, recognizing the divine in all things and understanding that every action, word, and thought carries spiritual weight. The great mystery is not an external force to be controlled or manipulated, but a living presence to be revered and respected. Central to Lakota spirituality is the idea that Wakan Tanka speaks through the land, the animals, the sky, and the people, and that those who are attuned to this presence can receive guidance and teachings through direct experience. To enter into a relationship with Wakan Tanka requires openness to the mystery of life, an acceptance of its complexity, and a willingness to walk in the world with reverence and gratitude. Those who listen to the voice of Wakan Tanka are guided by the teachings of the sacred, finding wisdom not in intellectual pursuit, but in a deeply felt connection to the world around them. Wakan Tanka also represents the concept of spiritual unity, the understanding that all living beings share a common spiritual essence that connects them to one another and to the divine. This unity is reflected in the Lakota concept of Mitakui Oyasin, meaning all my relatives, a phrase that acknowledges the interconnectedness of all life, human and non-human, as part of the sacred web created by Wakan Tanka. The Great Spirit's influence is thus not limited to human affairs but encompasses the entire world and all its inhabitants, demanding respect and care for every part of creation. The Great Mystery therefore is not a distant abstraction but a living, breathing force that sustains and guides all things with wisdom that transcends time and space, inviting people to seek a deeper understanding of their place within the cosmos, and to live in harmony with the divine presence that underpins every aspect of reality. Orenda in Iroquois spirituality is the mystical force that flows through all beings and objects, an unseen but deeply felt power that connects everything within the universe. It is not confined to any particular entity, but resides in all things, from the smallest pebble to the tallest tree, from a bird in flight to the very breath of a human being, or the pulse of the wind across the plains. Orenda is the life force that animates, empowers, and sustains the world, an invisible yet tangible energy that influences both the natural and spiritual realms, shaping the balance of life and the actions of those who carry it. This force is neither good nor evil, but it is morally neutral, with its expression dependent on how it is used or directed. It exists in all aspects of life, and can be harnessed for both constructive and destructive purposes. When individuals or communities align with Orenda, they are empowered to bring about healing, strength, and wisdom. It is through the careful cultivation and use of Orenda that one can act in harmony with the natural world, demonstrating respect and responsibility towards all things, living and non-living alike, thus fostering balance and unity. The concept of Orenda does not separate the spiritual from the material. It sees both as interconnected and interdependent. This force is intrinsic to all life, and every living being, plant, rock, and even an animate object possesses its own Orenda, contributing to the larger collective flow of energy that animates the universe. Thus, every action, every word, every thought is infused with Orenda, and has consequences, shaping the world around us. It is a constant reminder that all things are interconnected, and that the very essence of existence is governed by the balance of these forces. In the Iroquois worldview, Orenda is not a static force but a dynamic one, capable of being increased, diminished, or directed by human intentions, deeds, and spiritual practices. The wise use of Orenda is seen as a responsibility, as those who are able to tap into its power must do so with humility, recognizing the delicate balance between the self and the world around them. This respect for Orenda calls for a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all life, and an awareness that the choices one makes ripple through the larger web of existence. Rituals, prayers, and offerings are ways in which the Iroquois engage with Orenda, acknowledging its presence in their lives, and seeking its favor or guidance in times of need. These ceremonies serve as a reminder that humans are not the sole arbiters of their fate, but rather active participants in a broader spiritual system in which their actions are intimately connected to the forces of the world. When used with reverence and respect, Orenda becomes a source of healing, empowerment, and unity, fostering harmony within both the individual and the collective. In times of imbalance or suffering, Orenda can be called upon to restore harmony, whether through community rituals, the guidance of spiritual leaders, or personal reflection. Its power is understood as essential to the well-being of the individual and the group, underscoring the importance of maintaining good relationships with the world and each other, so that Orenda may flow freely and positively through all things. To reject or misdirect Orenda is seen as a dangerous act, one that can disrupt not just personal harmony, but the balance of the natural world itself. Orenda thus serves as a reminder that every element of the world is alive with spiritual energy, that no action is ever insignificant, and that every moment is an opportunity to engage consciously with the forces that govern existence. It invites people to live in alignment with the natural world, to listen to the unseen currents that run through all things, and to recognize that true power comes from respect, balance, and the wise stewardship of the forces that sustain life. Dreamtime in Aboriginal Australian spirituality is the foundational and eternal dimension in which the world was formed by ancestral beings, whose actions shaped the land, gave rise to life, and established the sacred patterns that continue to guide existence today. It is not merely a past era, but a timeless presence that flows beneath and through everyday life, connecting the physical landscape to the spiritual laws that govern behavior, identity, and belonging. Dreamtime is both origin and continuity, a cosmological memory embedded in stone, river, sky, and song, where every mountain range or waterhole holds the imprint of a story laid down by those who came before, and whose essence still resides within. These ancestral beings are not distant mythic figures, but living presences, whose journeys across the land created not only its physical features, but its moral and spiritual structure. They sang the world into being, walked the songlines that stretch across the continent, and through their movements and actions embedded meaning into every hill, valley, animal, and star. Dreamtime stories, passed down through oral tradition, carry the knowledge of these travels, serving as both sacred scripture and practical map, encoding the relationships between people and place, spirit and duty, kinship and law. To walk these lands is not to move through inert terrain, but to trace the sacred footsteps of creation, to encounter stories made real in the contours of the earth. The power of dreamtime is not confined to the distant past. It pulses through ritual, ceremony, art, and song, reawakening the connection between present generations and ancestral truths. Ceremonies reenact the dreamtime events, not merely as remembrance, but as renewal, sustaining the spiritual vitality of community and land, and ensuring that the world remains in balance. Painting and storytelling become acts of invocation, allowing people to access the deeper strata of reality, where the past, future, and present collapse into a single sacred continuum. Dreamtime is thus not only cosmology, but ontology, a way of being that places the individual within a vast and living order. This order is relational, not abstract, structured through intricate networks of kinship, totems, land responsibilities, and spiritual obligations. Each person has a place, a story, a link to specific dreaming tracks and ancestral sites that define who they are and how they must live. The dreaming is not owned but carried, inherited as a sacred trust that must be honored, protected, and shared with reverence. Knowledge is not merely intellectual but experiential, requiring participation, respect, and the guidance of elders who hold the authority to interpret and transmit its deeper layers with accuracy and care. The stories of Dreamtime are multi-layered, blending historical, moral, and spiritual truths within richly symbolic narratives that speak not only to Aboriginal people but to the land itself. Each retelling strengthens the relationship between community and country, maintaining the harmony between human life and the larger web of existence. When these connections are broken through neglect, exploitation, or ignorance, the spiritual balance is disturbed, and healing must come through reconnection to the dreaming, through ceremony, song, and the honoring of ancestral law. Dreamtime reveals a vision of reality, in which everything is animated by spirit, every feature of the land is sacred, and every person is a custodian of inherited meaning. It teaches that creation is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process, and that the ancestors are not gone but present in wind, fire, rock, and blood, their stories etched into the land and inscribed upon the soul of those who listen and remember. Manitou, in Algonquian spirituality, is the deeply felt and ever-present spiritual force that animates all aspects of existence. A sacred power that pulses through animals, rivers, stones, winds, dreams, and human beings alike, uniting everything within a living and interconnected cosmos. It is not a single deity nor a distant creator, but a pervasive essence that moves in both the visible and invisible realms, shaping life with energy, mystery, and intention. Manitou is the heartbeat of the forest, the voice in the thunder, the shimmer in the flame, and the breath in the lungs of all who live. It is both immanent and transcendent, dwelling in every part of nature while also transcending form and boundary. Rather than separating the sacred from the mundane, Algonquian traditions see Manitou as saturating the world so fully that to walk upon the earth is already to walk in spirit. Every tree has its Manitou, every rock carries a presence, every being speaks in ways that extend beyond language and into the domain of feeling, vision, and reverence. To live well is not to dominate or conquer, but to listen to the voice of Manitou in all things, to act with humility and reciprocity toward a world that is not inert matter but sacred kinship, to see the land not as property, but as relation, and the animals not as resources, but as brothers and teachers. Ceremonies, dreams, visions, and songs are ways of engaging with Manitou, but not to command or possess, rather to enter into respectful relationship, to seek guidance, healing, or balance. These practices reveal a worldview in which spirit and matter are woven together in a pattern of mutual influence, where human beings are never separate from nature, but are responsible participants in its unfolding. Every decision, every offering, every hunt is made with an awareness of the spiritual weight of the act, and a desire to honor the web of life in which Manitou resides, and through which Manitou speaks. Different expressions of Manitou appear in forms both personal and collective. There is the Manitou of an individual, the Manitou of a place, the great Manitou that connects all beings, and the Manitous of specific plants, animals, and phenomena, each with their own gifts and character, yet all part of the same spiritual current that animates the cosmos. This plural and layered understanding does not fragment reality, but reveals its richness, its depth, and its sacred reciprocity. Through Manitou, the world becomes a dynamic field of relationships shaped not by hierarchy, but by exchange, offering, responsibility, and shared vitality. The presence of Manitou is not always gentle. It can be fierce, stormy, or elusive, reflecting the complexity of nature itself. To live in alignment with Manitou requires attentiveness, courage, and reverence. It means recognizing that every action has spiritual consequence, that every place holds memory, and that the land itself listens and responds through cycles of abundance and scarcity, of harmony and disruption. When harmony is broken through disrespect or imbalance, illness or misfortune may follow, prompting a return to ceremony and respect as a means of restoring the sacred flow. In this way, Manitou becomes the spiritual architecture of Algonquian life, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a living sense of the world, one that binds people to the land and to each other through shared rituals, shared language, and a shared sense that all of existence is infused with spirit, and that to walk through the world is always to walk in relation to a power both intimate and vast. Filial piety, or Shao, in Confucianism, is the foundational virtue of reverence for one's parents and ancestors. A deep ethical commitment that extends beyond mere obedience to encompass gratitude, respect, and the recognition of one's place within a living continuum of familial and moral responsibility. It is not simply a private sentiment, but a public expression of moral order, in which the family becomes the primary arena for the cultivation of virtue and the transmission of values through generations. The child who honors their parents is not only showing affection, but participating in the shaping of a just and harmonious society by embodying respect, loyalty, and care in its most intimate form. This virtue begins with the daily acts of service and attentiveness, ensuring that one's parents are supported in both material and emotional needs. But it extends far beyond the household into the moral legacy one leaves by living a life of integrity that reflects honor upon one's lineage. To practice Shao is to remember that one's existence is not isolated but rooted in the sacrifices and labors of those who came before. It is to acknowledge that every individual is shaped by a web of relationships, and that personal virtue must be anchored in the acknowledgement and care of those foundational bonds. In death as in life, filial piety continues through rituals of mourning, offerings, and ancestral veneration, which are not superstitious remnants but vital expressions of continuity between the living and the dead. These practices affirm that the bonds of kinship do not end with the grave, and that honoring one's parents is a lifelong endeavor, expressed through remembrance, gratitude, and moral conduct. In this way, Shao becomes a bridge between generations, preserving the wisdom of the past and planting the seeds of virtue for the future. Through these acts, the family becomes a sacred vessel for the cultivation of societal harmony. Confucius placed Shao at the heart of political and ethical life because he understood that a society in which children honor their parents will produce citizens who honor their rulers and elders with similar respect and restraint. This logic flows outward from the family to the state, and from the personal to the cosmic, suggesting that when familial duties are fulfilled, the moral fabric of the entire world is strengthened. The virtue of Shao therefore carries both intimate and universal dimensions, guiding the formation of character and shaping the structure of just governance through the practice of reverence at home. Far from being passive or hierarchical, Shao involves the active cultivation of empathy, patience, and moral awareness. It teaches that respect is not blind submission, but thoughtful engagement that cares for others with dignity and humility, even when there is disagreement. It requires sacrifice and restraint, but also the capacity to listen, understand, and grow within the framework of a relationship that transcends individual desire and personal ambition. Shao demands that we see ourselves as part of a larger story, one that began before us and will continue after us, and that through this story, our lives find meaning, structure, and moral weight. To live with filial piety is to walk each day with the awareness that one's words and actions echo through generations, to carry forward the honor of one's name, and to transmit through quiet care and enduring respect, a vision of humanity in which the bonds between people are not burdens but sacred threads of connection, weaving the private love of family into the public ethics of civilization. Tao in Taoism is the ineffable and all-encompassing principle that underlies, generates, and sustains the entire universe. It is not a god, nor a force in the conventional sense, but the source from which all things arise and to which all things return, a nameless origin that precedes existence yet permeates every aspect of it. The Tao is both the path and the pattern, the mysterious flow that shapes galaxies and governs the falling of a leaf, without intention or effort. It is not something one can grasp or define through language, because any attempt to name it reduces it from what it is into what it is not. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. In its quiet power, the Tao operates through spontaneity, subtlety, and stillness, guiding the cosmos without command and shaping the world without intervention. It is the void that gives rise to form, the silence behind every sound, and the emptiness that allows for fullness. Unlike systems that impose order through rules or design, the Tao reveals a natural order that arises when things are allowed to be what they are, to flow according to their own nature. This way of being is not chaotic, but profoundly harmonious, a dynamic equilibrium in which opposites balance not by force, but by yielding and turning into each other in cycles of transformation. The sage who follows the Tao does not strive or control, but aligns with its movement through a cultivated state of wu wei or effortless action. This is not inaction, but action without ego or resistance, flowing like water around obstacles, finding the lowest place and nourishing all things without seeking reward. To live by the Tao is to let go of rigid distinctions and to return to the simplicity of being, to trust in the unfolding of events, to recognize that the more one interferes, the more one disrupts, and that true strength lies in flexibility and humility, rather than in assertion or dominance. The Tao is also expressed through nature, whose rhythms and transformations mirror its invisible guidance. The changing seasons, the growth of plants, the rise and fall of tides, all reflect the silent wisdom of the Tao, which moves without intention and achieves without striving. The Tao nourishes life not by planning, but by being present in all things. And it is this presence that the Taoist seeks to feel and follow, not by mastering it but by surrendering to it, by quieting the mind and refining the senses until one lives not beside the Tao, but within it. In human affairs, the Tao suggests that balance, peace, and flourishing arise not from control, but from harmony with the larger flow of life, from governance that nurtures without oppressing, from relationships that grow through mutual respect rather than dominance, and from actions that arise not from personal desire, but from attunement to what the moment calls for. The teachings of the Tao do not aim to provide answers or commands, but to awaken a deep awareness of the patterns of life, and a gentle wisdom that moves in rhythm with the unseen pulse of the universe. Tao remains ever present, yet ever elusive, both nowhere and everywhere. It invites not belief, but observation, not conquest but surrender, asking us not to impose ourselves upon the world, but to become part of its unfolding, to walk the way not by directing the path, but by dissolving into the path itself, and finding in that dissolution the source from which all things arise. Ming in Chinese folk religion represents the intricate and often mysterious concept of fate or destiny as ordained by heaven, a force that governs the unfolding of human lives within the larger cosmic order. It is not merely a chain of events, nor a rigid determinism, but a profound recognition that each person's life is shaped by a mandate beyond individual control, one that reflects a deeper alignment with the rhythms and intentions of Tian, or heaven. Rather than being arbitrary or mechanical, Ming is viewed as carrying moral significance, suggesting that one's station, lifespan or success may be connected to the ethical and spiritual balance between heaven and human conduct. This concept permeates Chinese thought with a sense of humility and reverence, acknowledging that while human beings possess agency and responsibility, their lives are never entirely self-directed. Ming teaches that there are forces at work, ancestral influence, celestial patterns, spiritual resonance, that shape circumstances and outcomes in ways that cannot be fully grasped or manipulated. It encourages an attitude of acceptance, not as resignation, but as trust in a cosmic design that holds a higher wisdom. Ming is like the path of a river winding through unknown lands, carrying each person forward with a current that reflects both their nature and their place in the grand tapestry of existence. In classical texts, Ming is often paired with concepts like dead virtue and Jing innate nature, implying that though one's destiny may be set by heaven, it is through moral cultivation and understanding of one's nature that a person aligns themselves with that destiny, rather than struggling against it. The sages taught that a person who lives in harmony with Ming displays equanimity in the face of change, serenity in success and failure, and a profound clarity that allows them to act with integrity regardless of outcome. To accept Ming is not to retreat into passivity, but to move through life with grounded awareness of both the limits and the meaning of human will. This balance between freedom and fate gives Ming a rich and layered significance. It allows for personal striving while reminding individuals of the importance of humility. It honors the unknown without discouraging effort, and it fosters gratitude by recognizing that much of what is received in life is not earned through control, but granted through grace. Ming also plays a crucial role in rituals, prayers and ancestral veneration, where people seek to understand, interpret, or influence the unfolding of their fate, not through command, but through reverent appeal, through aligning their lives with heaven's order rather than attempting to dominate it. Whether viewed through the lens of fortune-telling, dream interpretation, or moral philosophy, Ming remains a vital cultural expression of the tension between what can be shaped and what must be accepted. It teaches that to live well is to walk the path assigned by heaven with virtue, courage, and awareness, and that the truest harmony arises when one's actions align not only with earthly duties, but with the unseen currents of a destiny that connects every individual to the larger moral and spiritual fabric of the cosmos. He in Confucianism embodies the subtle yet profound principle of harmony, a condition in which relationships, communities, and societies flourish not through uniformity or suppression, but through the balanced integration of differences, guided by mutual respect and ethical responsibility. It is not the absence of conflict, nor the imposition of order, but the cultivated state where tensions are resolved through understanding, and where each element contributes to a greater whole. Like distinct instruments in an orchestra producing a single resonant sound, harmony arises when each voice is heard, and each role fulfilled in accordance with its place and purpose. At its heart, he is relational. It emerges not in isolation, but in the space between people, where communication, sincerity, and empathy shape the moral atmosphere of human life. It is the virtue that transforms ritual into reverence and law into justice, ensuring that social order is not brittle or coercive, but resilient and humane. Confucius viewed harmony as the guiding aim of governance, education, and daily conduct, because a harmonious society reflects the well-ordered heart of the individual, one who understands both their duty and their connection to others. In this vision, personal cultivation and social stability are inseparable, each nourishing and reflecting the other in a continuous cycle of moral development. Harmony does not mean sameness, nor does it seek to erase difference. Instead, it honors diversity within a shared moral framework, encouraging balance rather than dominance, and cooperation rather than competition. It is the principle that allows superiors to lead with benevolence and subordinates to respond with loyalty, that helps friends disagree without division, and communities deliberate without descending into discord. It is built upon the Confucian understanding that human beings are inherently relational creatures, and that the highest form of virtue arises not in solitude, but in the artful navigation of complex social bonds. The practice of He requires restraint, humility, and attentiveness. It asks one to listen deeply to others, to recognize the weight of one's words and actions, and to act always with the intention of preserving dignity and cohesion, rather than inflaming ego or conflict. It is not reactive, but responsive, requiring discernment of what each situation calls for, and a willingness to yield where needed without losing integrity. It favors persuasion over punishment, dialogue over decree, and consensus over compulsion, for it understands that lasting order grows not from fear but from trust. In governance, harmony is achieved when rulers align their policies with the needs of the people, when justice is tempered with compassion, and when leaders serve as moral exemplars, whose behavior shapes the tone of the entire state. In education, it is realized when learning cultivates character, not just knowledge, and when the teacher's guidance fosters both independence and ethical awareness. In daily life, it is found in the balance between assertion and concession, between self-respect and selflessness, and in the ability to hold differences without division, allowing community to thrive amidst complexity. He reminds us that true stability does not come from control, but from moral resonance, from the echo of virtue at every level of society, where each part attunes itself to the well-being of the whole, and where peace is not imposed from above, but generated from within through the quiet strength of ethical harmony. Yin and Yang in Taoism represent the elegant and dynamic interplay of complementary opposites, two forces that exist not in conflict, but in continuous relationship, forming the rhythm and balance of all things in the universe. They are not adversaries locked in struggle, but partners in an eternal dance, where light and shadow, heat and cold, activity and stillness all arise and give way to one another in a ceaseless cycle. This principle reveals that duality is not division, but unity in motion, a harmony that unfolds through contrast rather than through sameness. It teaches that the world is not made of isolated absolutes, but of interdependent polarities that define and complete each other. Yin is the receptive, the cooling, the hidden, the inward turning, the stillness of the night, the fertility of the earth, the softness of water that yields without breaking. Yang is the active, the warming, the visible, the outward pushing, the energy of the sun, the fire of movement, the firmness that initiates and leads. They are not fixed categories, but flowing qualities that rise and fall in response to each other, giving shape and rhythm to time, seasons, emotions, health, and transformation. When Yin reaches its fullness, it naturally gives birth to Yang, and when Yang exhausts its peak, it returns to Yin. Each contains the seed of the other, as symbolized in the familiar Taijitu, where the black swirl holds a point of white, and the white swirl holds a point of black. This perspective encourages a way of seeing that transcends rigid binaries and embraces the fluidity of life. Rather than labeling experiences as good or bad, strong or weak, desirable or undesirable, the wisdom of Yin and Yang invites us to see that all things have their time and place, and that balance is not achieved through dominance or suppression, but through attunement and mutual responsiveness. It is the understanding that day cannot exist without night, that inhale must follow exhale, and that every rising action carries within it the necessity of rest. Taoism does not seek to eliminate tension, but to harmonize it, to find the middle path, where energies are neither stagnant nor extreme, but move in accordance with the Tao. In the body, this principle manifests as the balance of health. In the mind, it reflects the harmony of emotions. In society, it calls for a balance between assertiveness and humility, between individual will and collective harmony. The healer restores the flow of Yin and Yang. The leader governs by balancing firmness with compassion. The artist creates by sensing the contrast between movement and pause. By learning to observe and respect the dance of opposites, one moves not against the current of life, but with it, understanding that resistance breeds conflict, while alignment brings ease. Yin and Yang thus reveal a vision of wholeness, where change is natural and opposites are necessary, not to be resolved, but to be honored. Through their dance, we see that transformation is not the product of force, but of timing and relationship. That wisdom does not lie in extremes, but in responsiveness, and that peace is not stillness alone, but the grace that emerges when movement and rest are woven together in the proper rhythm of things. Dzogchen in Taoism is the profound and elusive principle of naturalness, a way of being that flows from the spontaneous unfolding of one's true nature without interference, contrivance, or artificial shaping. It is not simply doing whatever one pleases, nor is it a passive drift through life, but rather a deep alignment with the unforced rhythms of existence, in which thought, action, and presence arise effortlessly from within, like the blooming of a flower or the path of a stream through the mountains. Dzogchen speaks to a state where nothing is added or subtracted, and where everything becomes what it is, without struggle or self-consciousness. The word itself literally means self-so, suggesting something that is so of itself, not determined by external causes or bound by imposed expectations, but emerging freely and authentically from the essence of what it is. To live according to Dzogchen is to return to one's original simplicity, before conditioning distorted spontaneity or burden the self with rigid structures. It means to let the Tao move through life without grasping or resisting, without imposing plans or identities that fracture the quiet unity of being. In this state, one does not act with intention in the usual sense, but acts because action arises naturally, as the right thing in the right moment, as effortless as a leaf falling or the moon crossing the sky. Dzogchen is often described in contrast to artificiality, which in Taoist texts is the hallmark of a life misaligned with the Tao. When one tries too hard to be virtuous, wise, or successful, one becomes entangled in appearances and ego-driven behavior that create discord within and without. Dzogchen, by contrast, invites a return to the uncarved block, the original state before names, labels, and desires intervene. It is the root of true freedom, not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom to be everything one is, without force or manipulation. When the sage embodies Dzogchen, they become like nature itself, serene yet dynamic, humble yet powerful, always in harmony with the deeper flow of the world. The cultivation of Dzogchen paradoxically requires a kind of uncultivation, a shedding of layers rather than an accumulation of techniques, a softening into presence rather than a tightening of control. It asks one to observe the world not with the eyes of conquest, but with the eyes of wonder, to participate in life not as a planner or conqueror, but as a dancer who responds to the music with ease and joy. In this space, there is no division between self and world, because both arise from the same source and return to the same stillness. Spontaneity is not chaotic but elegant, not erratic but attuned, because it grows from attentiveness and trust in the patterns that already exist. This trust is at the heart of Dzogchen. It means letting the seed grow without pulling on the stem, letting the wind blow without trying to cage it, letting each moment arrive and depart without clinging to what was or should be. In doing so, one discovers that the most subtle and powerful way to live is to stop trying to control life, and instead become part of its unfolding, to be like the valley that receives all waters, or the bamboo that bends in the storm yet remains unbroken. Dzogchen reveals that there is a wisdom deeper than reason, a movement truer than intention, and a beauty more enduring than any that can be manufactured or forced. Ren in Confucianism is the radiant core of human virtue, a profound and encompassing ideal that signifies humanness, benevolence, and the deep moral sensitivity that binds people together through empathy, care, and mutual respect. It is not a rule to be followed or a doctrine to be memorized, but a lived expression of the heart's highest capacity to feel with and for others, to act in ways that nourish relationships, and to recognize one's shared humanity in every encounter. Ren animates the ethical life with warmth and sincerity, shaping not just what one does but how one does it, with kindness, grace, and integrity. It emerges from the understanding that human beings are not isolated entities, but relational beings defined by their connections to family, community, and the broader world. Ren guides these connections by fostering compassion in the parent-child bond, loyalty and friendship and respect between rulers and subjects. It is expressed when a person treats others as they would wish to be treated, not from obligation but from a cultivated sense of inner virtue that naturally seeks the good of others. It is not reducible to sentimentality, nor is it limited to grand acts of charity, but can be seen in the smallest gesture, a kind word, a patient ear, a silent support offered in a moment of need. For Confucius, Ren is the virtue that gives all other virtues their life and meaning. It is the wellspring from which justice, propriety, wisdom, and trustworthiness draw their moral force. Without Ren, rituals become hollow and laws become cold. It is the principle that breathes spirit into social order, that makes ethical conduct not just correct but deeply right in a way that resonates with the human soul. Cultivating Ren is a lifelong task, requiring self-reflection, study, and a deliberate effort to extend one's concern beyond the self. It demands that one constantly ask, how can I better understand another's suffering? How can I act in a way that uplifts rather than diminishes? How can I be a presence of kindness in a world of competing desires and ego-driven pursuits? Ren is not achieved by withdrawal from the world, but through wholehearted engagement with it. It calls for the development of a heart that is soft enough to feel, yet strong enough to act, one that can grieve with the grieving, rejoice with the joyful, and stand with the vulnerable. It is a virtue that begins within, but cannot stay there. It must ripple outward in ever-widening circles of inclusion, embracing first the family, then the neighborhood, then the state, and finally the world. This outward movement does not dilute Ren, but deepens it, as the practitioner comes to see that their well-being is inseparable from the well-being of others. To live with Ren is to walk through life with a moral clarity that is not rigid but responsive, attuned to context and guided by compassion. It shapes how one speaks, how one listens, how one leads, and how one follows. It demands both humility and courage, both gentleness and resolve, and through its cultivation it transforms the individual into a moral presence whose very being inspires trust, fosters peace, and reminds others of what it means to be fully human. In its quiet power and enduring relevance, Ren stands as the heart of Confucian ethics, a vision of moral life not as duty but as relationship, not as control but as care. Lai in Confucianism is the intricate and foundational principle of ritual propriety, a concept that extends far beyond formal ceremonies to encompass the entire structure of ethical conduct, social interaction, and cultivated behavior that sustains harmony within the individual and society. It is not merely about performing rites or following traditions, but about embodying a sense of reverence, decorum, and appropriateness in every action, so that the rhythms of personal life align with the greater moral order. Just as music requires both melody and discipline, Lai functions as the unseen scaffolding that gives shape to virtue, and ensures that the spontaneous energy of human feeling is refined through structure and intention. The essence of Lai lies in its ability to transform ordinary actions into expressions of deeper meaning, turning the mundane into the sacred and the social into the moral. Whether it is bowing before ancestors, offering a greeting with humility, or observing family roles with respect, every gesture becomes a thread in the larger fabric of human connection and order. By cultivating Lai, one not only honors the past but actively contributes to a future in which peace and respect are possible. This emphasis on relational ethics positions human beings not as isolated agents, but as inherently embedded within networks of obligation, care, and responsiveness, where each action has the power to uplift or disrupt the moral ecology of the whole. Confucius viewed Lai as a vehicle through which the inner virtues of Ren humanness and Yi righteousness are expressed and realized outwardly. Lai channels emotion into grace and turns instinct into wisdom. It is not enough to feel compassion. One must know how to express it in a way that is timely and fitting. It is not sufficient to be sincere. One must act in accordance with the norms that bind sincerity to social context. This attention to form does not negate authenticity, but deepens it, allowing the heart's intention to resonate clearly through gestures that are understood and valued by the community. Through Lai, individuals refine their character in tandem with their social role, learning that self-cultivation and societal harmony are inseparable pursuits. Rather than being static or rigid, Lai is adaptive and responsive, evolving with time while preserving continuity. It encourages deference without submission, strength without arrogance, and leadership without coercion. A parent guiding a child, a student respecting a teacher, or a ruler serving the people, all partake in Lai when their actions are guided not by dominance but by mutual respect and shared moral aims. The smallest acts, pouring tea for an elder, bowing to a guest, or addressing someone with proper courtesy, can embody the greatest truths when performed with attention and sincerity, because they affirm the dignity of all participants and reinforce the ethical architecture of society. The practice of Lai thus becomes a lifelong discipline, a kind of moral choreography in which each step, gesture, and word contributes to the larger dance of human flourishing. It teaches that virtue does not merely reside in intention, but must be externalized through consistent and conscientious behavior over time. This makes Lai both deeply personal and profoundly public, a reminder that the way we treat others in daily life is not separate from spiritual cultivation, but the very means through which it is realized. The moral beauty of Lai lies in its subtlety in how it shapes character through repetition and mindfulness, and in how it turns everyday interactions into opportunities for grace, reverence, and transformation. Wu Wei in Taoism is the subtle and paradoxical principle of effortless action, a way of being in the world that flows in perfect harmony with the natural order without resistance, force, or contrivance. It does not imply passivity or inaction, but rather a deep attunement to the rhythms of life, in which action arises spontaneously, appropriately, and without strain. Like water finding the lowest path or a tree bending with the wind, Wu Wei describes the art of doing by not doing, of achieving without grasping, and of influencing without imposing. It is a concept that challenges conventional notions of willpower and control by suggesting that the most effective way to act is to relinquish the ego's insistence on control, and to let the Tao move through us. This approach rests on a fundamental trust in the Tao, the underlying principle or flow of the universe, which governs all things with a quiet and unforced intelligence. To live according to Wu Wei is to recognize that the more we meddle, strive, or overthink, the more we disrupt the delicate balance of life and generate unintended consequences. The sage, therefore, cultivates a state of relaxed alertness, a responsiveness that does not cling to fixed plans or rigid ideals, but adapts fluidly to circumstances with grace and humility. This kind of action does not leave a heavy trace, but is like a bird's flight through air or a fish's path through water, effective, yet without struggle or residue. In classic Taoist texts such as the Tao Te Ching and the writings of Zhuangzi, Wu Wei is presented as a guiding ideal not only for individuals but for rulers, artists, and sages. It is said that the best leader is one whose presence is barely noticed, whose influence is so gentle and aligned that the people say, "We did it ourselves." Similarly, the master carpenter achieves the finest results not by forcing the wood, but by understanding its grain and letting the shape emerge from within. This non-coercive mode of action extends into every domain of life, suggesting that wisdom is not about conquering nature or overcoming obstacles, but about perceiving the invisible currents beneath appearances and aligning oneself with them, so that effort is minimized and harmony is maximized. Wu Wei also reflects a profound psychological insight into the nature of desire and conflict. When we act from egoic ambition or anxious control, we create resistance not only in the world but within ourselves. Our thoughts become divided, our attention scattered, and our sense of ease disturbed. In contrast, the mind in Wu Wei is spacious, present, and uncluttered. It allows experience to unfold without interference and sees clearly what needs to be done, and when to stop. There is no need for overexertion because everything arises in its proper time and way. From this perspective, control becomes unnecessary because alignment has taken its place, and the need to dominate is replaced by the power of receptivity. This principle does not mean abandoning responsibility or becoming indifferent, but rather approaching life with a spirit of cooperation rather than competition. To act with Wu Wei is to recognize that the world is not something to be fixed according to our preferences, but a living process to be harmonized with through careful observation and subtle responsiveness. This may manifest in something as simple as knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, or as complex as guiding a community without overt manipulation. The less we interfere, the more space we give for the natural intelligence of the Tao to reveal itself, and the more effective our actions become, precisely because they do not come from a place of struggle. Wu Wei also invites a re-evaluation of effort itself, not as something to be glorified in its intensity, but refined in its quality. It does not reject discipline, but transforms it from something rigid into something supple, like bamboo that bends without breaking. This form of action requires a high degree of awareness and presence, but it expresses itself not through tension but through ease, not through assertion but through resonance. The more one aligns with the Tao, the less one needs to strive, because action emerges as an extension of being rather than an imposition upon it. And through this effortless flow one finds a kind of mastery that feels weightless yet deeply grounded, a form of strength that is gentle yet enduring. Tathagatarbha in Mahayana Buddhism is the profound doctrine that all sentient beings inherently possess the potential for enlightenment. A hidden seed of Buddhahood that lies veiled beneath layers of delusion, ignorance and karmic obscuration. It is a concept both poetic and metaphysical, asserting that the true nature of mind is luminous, pure and boundless, even if this reality is temporarily obscured by defilements. Much like clouds covering the sun is not created by removing the clouds but revealed through their dissolution. In the same way, the Tathagatarbha, or Buddha nature, is not something to be acquired but rediscovered through the process of awakening. This teaching reconfigures the view of spiritual progress from a linear ascent toward an external goal to an inward unveiling of what has always been present yet unrecognized. It does not deny the necessity of discipline, ethical practice, or meditation, but situates them as tools for uncovering an innate perfection rather than constructing it anew. Unlike models that frame human beings as fundamentally flawed or fallen, the Tathagatarbha view affirms the essential dignity and purity at the heart of all life. Even the most deluded or violent being retains this inner Buddha nature, though it may be buried beneath countless lifetimes of misperception and harmful action. This radical inclusivity stands as a cornerstone of Mahayana's compassion, insisting that no one is beyond redemption, because the essence of awakening is already within. In classical texts such as the Tathagatarbha Sutra and the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the concept is likened to gold hidden in filth, a treasure locked in a decaying house, or a jewel wrapped in rags. Each metaphor emphasizes that the precious core remains untainted despite outer conditions, and that with the right understanding and effort, it can be uncovered and realized. This understanding does not foster complacency, but galvanizes the practitioner with the faith that every step taken toward clarity and compassion is supported by the deepest truth of one's own being. The notion of Buddha nature bridges the gap between relative delusion and ultimate enlightenment by establishing continuity between what we are and what we may become. This doctrine also serves as a safeguard against spiritual elitism by reminding us that even the highest Buddhas were once bound by ignorance, and that even the lowest beings carry within them the same capacity for liberation. It invites a non-hierarchical view of existence, where all forms of life are worthy of respect, empathy, and guidance, not because of what they currently exhibit, but because of what they essentially are. In this way, the Bodhisattva path is motivated not by pity or superiority, but by reverence for the unmanifested awakening within each being. To aid another is not to bestow something foreign, but to mirror back what they already possess in seed form. Tathagatarbha has also inspired rich philosophical dialogue, particularly in relation to the doctrine of emptiness. While some interpretations risk reifying Buddha nature into a kind of eternal self, Mahayana thinkers like Maitreya and later Yogacara scholars emphasize that this potential should not be mistaken for a soul or fixed identity. Rather, it is empty of inherent existence, yet full of inexhaustible qualities such as wisdom, compassion, and bliss. When realized, these qualities are not additions but expressions of the awakened mind's true nature, free from clinging, fear, and fragmentation. The Tathagatarbha is not a static essence, but a dynamic, self-liberating clarity that emerges when dualistic thinking falls away. From a practical standpoint, the recognition of Buddha nature offers both hope and responsibility. It encourages practitioners to trust their own capacity for transformation, while urging them to act in ways that nourish the awakening already stirring within themselves and others. Meditative awareness, ethical integrity, and compassionate activity are no longer external obligations, but natural extensions of one's deepest identity. The more one aligns with this nature, the more life is experienced not as a burden of becoming, but as a return to what has never been absent. Though the journey may be long and strewn with obstacles, the presence of Tathagatarbha ensures that awakening is not a distant possibility, but a present reality, waiting to be revealed through insight, devotion, and compassionate effort. Bodhicitta in Mahayana Buddhism is the profound and luminous aspiration to attain enlightenment, not for personal liberation alone, but for the benefit of all sentient beings, a union of deep compassion and unwavering wisdom, that reshapes the very orientation of the spiritual path from self-concern to universal care. It is often described as the mind of awakening, a subtle yet powerful intention that transforms ordinary existence into a vehicle for boundless altruism and spiritual realization. Arising spontaneously, or through deliberate cultivation, bodhicitta is the heartbeat of the bodhisattva path, infusing every action with the purpose of relieving the suffering of others and guiding them toward liberation from the cycles of birth and death. This aspiration is not mere sentiment or idealism, but a disciplined and expansive state of mind, rooted in the direct understanding of the interdependence of all phenomena. According to Mahayana thought, no being exists in isolation, and all are bound together by an intricate web of causes and conditions. Thus the suffering of others is not separate from one's own, and to seek enlightenment while ignoring the plight of others is a contradiction of the deepest spiritual truths. Bodhicitta arises from this recognition, compelling the practitioner to renounce the narrow pursuit of self-benefit, and instead embrace a path that is infinitely inclusive and radically compassionate. Each moment becomes an opportunity to cultivate wisdom and kindness, not as ends in themselves, but as instruments to uplift all forms of life. Bodhicitta is traditionally divided into two dimensions, the relative and the ultimate. On the relative level, it manifests as the heartfelt wish to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings, and the practical effort to engage in virtuous conduct, developing patience, generosity and moral discipline. On the ultimate level, it is the direct insight into the nature of reality as empty of inherent existence, a realization that dissolves self-clinging and reveals the inseparability of wisdom and compassion. These two aspects are not in conflict but are deeply intertwined, for the clarity of ultimate bodhicitta fuels the effectiveness of relative compassion and prevents it from being overwhelmed by attachment, pity, or despair. It is this integration that gives bodhicitta its extraordinary depth and resilience. Unlike transient emotional states, bodhicitta is cultivated through rigorous inner training, including analytical meditation, ethical refinement, and devotional practices, such as visualizing oneself taking on the suffering of others and offering them happiness. This mental reorientation begins to erode the habitual egoic tendencies that dominate ordinary consciousness and replaces them with a deep-seated concern for the welfare of all beings, including those perceived as enemies or obstacles. In this way, bodhicitta functions not only as a moral guide, but as a method of profound psychological transformation, dismantling the delusions that perpetuate suffering and reinforcing the view that all beings, regardless of form or status, possess the potential for enlightenment. One of the most striking qualities of bodhicitta is its boundlessness. Unlike finite goals that can be achieved and then set aside, the aspiration of bodhicitta continues to expand as one progresses on the path. It is said that even after attaining full Buddhahood, a bodhisattva continues to manifest in the world to assist others, refusing to enter final nirvana until every being is free from suffering. This endless commitment is not born of obligation, but of spontaneous joy and wisdom, a recognition that the division between self and other is an illusion, and that true happiness is found in connection, not separation. In this sense, bodhicitta is not only the cause of enlightenment, but its living expression in thought, speech and action. The cultivation of bodhicitta is considered the most noble and precious of all aspirations in the Mahayana tradition, because it ensures that spiritual progress is not corrupted by self-interest or pride, but remains rooted in humility, empathy, and insight. It is compared to a seed that grows into a vast tree under which countless beings may find shelter, or to a spark that ignites the fire of universal awakening. Without this aspiration, even advanced meditation or philosophical understanding remains incomplete, lacking the vital element that bridges personal insight with collective liberation. By generating bodhicitta, the practitioner aligns with the deepest currents of Mahayana thought, and steps onto a path where the boundaries of self dissolve into the immeasurable sky of compassion that touches all corners of existence. Brahman in Hindu philosophy is the foundational, unchanging reality that underlies and transcends the entire universe, a limitless, formless, eternal principle that exists beyond the constraints of time, space, and causation. It is not merely a deity or a supreme being in the conventional sense, but rather the infinite substratum of all existence, the silent witness behind all forms and phenomena. Brahman is described as Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness and bliss, pointing to its essential nature as pure existence, boundless awareness and infinite joy. This conception dismantles any rigid dualism between creator and creation by affirming that all that exists is not separate from Brahman, but is in essence Brahman itself, manifesting through various forms and expressions. The Upanishads, the ancient philosophical texts of Hinduism, are the primary sources that explore the depths of Brahman in great detail, proclaiming that Brahman is beyond the grasp of the senses, beyond thought, and beyond language. It cannot be defined in terms of attributes or qualities, because it precedes all dualistic distinctions and conceptual categories. Instead, it is realized through the direct experience of the self, when one transcends the illusion of separateness and awakens to the truth that Atman, the individual self, is not other than Brahman. This realization, often encapsulated in the Mahavakya Tat Tvam that thou art, represents the pinnacle of spiritual awakening in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, where the perceived multiplicity of the world dissolves into the unified essence of pure being. This profound notion reconfigures our understanding of reality, by positing that the world of names and forms, though experienced as real, is ultimately a projection of Maya, the power of illusion that veils the true nature of Brahman. The objects, events and selves that populate our everyday experience are not denied, but are seen as impermanent expressions of an underlying unity that is never born and never dies. The process of spiritual growth, in this context, involves peeling away these layers of illusion through self-inquiry, meditation and discernment until one perceives the undivided field of Brahman behind the fleeting drama of life. This does not render the world meaningless, but rather infuses it with a sacred dimension by revealing that all things are rooted in the same divine reality. Brahman is also the ground of all order, intelligence, and beauty in the cosmos. It is not a remote or indifferent principle but the very heart of existence, intimately present in every atom and moment. It is both immanent and transcendent, simultaneously within all things and beyond all things, offering a vision of divinity that embraces both the inner soul and the outer world. This seamless integration allows for a spirituality that does not reject the world but sanctifies it, recognizing the sacred in the mundane and the eternal in the ephemeral. To perceive Brahman is to see the divine pulsing through all aspects of life, from the movement of galaxies to the stillness of a quiet breath. In metaphysical terms, Brahman is not subject to change or decay because it is not composed of parts, nor dependent on anything else for its existence. It is self-existent, infinite and indivisible, standing as the absolute reference point against which all relative phenomena appear and disappear. Because it is untouched by causality, Brahman is not created, sustained or destroyed, but simply is. It is the necessary reality that makes all contingent realities possible. In this way, it functions not as an object of worship in the ordinary sense, but as the very essence of consciousness through which all knowing and being arise. The seeker who realizes this truth no longer sees the world as separate or threatening, but enters a state of abiding peace and wisdom, where all distinctions between self and other, subject and object, fade into a luminous, undifferentiated awareness. The path to realizing Brahman requires a disciplined turning inward, away from the distractions of sensory life and toward the still, silent core of one's own being, where the light of consciousness shines without obstruction. It is not a journey towards something external, but a recognition of what has always been present, hidden beneath layers of conditioning and ignorance. This realization does not produce a new self, but dissolves the illusion of the limited self, revealing the vast unbounded presence that is Brahman itself, free from birth and death, free from fear and desire, and untouched by the fluctuations of the mind. To know Brahman is to rest in the certainty that beneath the play of impermanence lies a truth that never wavers, a ground of being that is perfect, complete and ever-present. Karma in Jainism is a meticulously structured and deeply consequential principle that governs the moral mechanics of the universe, through a system of strict causality, where every action, whether mental, verbal, or physical, directly binds subtle particles of karmic matter to the soul. Unlike more metaphorical interpretations found in other traditions, Jainism treats karma as a literal substance, a fine, imperceptible form of matter that adheres to the jiva or soul, as a result of passions such as anger, pride, deceit, and greed. This unique formulation elevates karma from an abstract ethical idea to a physical process governed by precise laws of cause and effect, wherein every ethical infraction results in an accumulation of karmic particles that obscure the soul's innate qualities of infinite knowledge, perception, energy, and bliss. According to Jain philosophy, the soul in its purest form is perfect and luminous, but it becomes defiled through contact with karma, which clings to it over countless lifetimes due to actions motivated by attachment and aversion. This process of karmic accumulation is not arbitrary, nor mitigated by divine intervention or grace. Rather, it is a rigorously self-regulated law of nature, where each cause leads inevitably to a corresponding effect, whether pleasurable or painful. The doctrine asserts that there is no escape from karmic retribution through rituals, prayers, or forgiveness alone. Only through self-discipline, asceticism, and ethical purity can karmic matter be burned off and the soul liberated from its entrapment in the cycle of birth and death, known as samsara. This framework places full responsibility for spiritual progress on the individual and emphasizes personal accountability to an extent unmatched in most other systems. One of the most defining features of the Jain view of karma is its uncompromising attention to the smallest acts and intentions. Even an unexpressed thought or a momentary impulse of violence has the potential to attract karma, thereby requiring constant vigilance and mindfulness in daily conduct. The strict code of ahimsa, or non-violence, is a natural extension of this view, guiding practitioners to avoid harm not only to humans but to all forms of life, including insects, plants, and microorganisms. This ethic is not merely compassionate but strategic, as harming others invariably leads to karmic consequences that must be endured or expiated. In this way, the moral landscape in Jainism becomes both intensely personal and universally connected, with every interaction serving as a potential point of spiritual advancement or degradation. The complexity of karma in Jainism is also reflected in its classification system, which categorizes karmic particles into 8 major types, each affecting different dimensions of the soul's experience, such as lifespan, social status, spiritual insight, or the capacity for joy and suffering. These karmas further subdivide into hundreds of subtypes, indicating a highly systematic approach to moral causation that mirrors the logic of natural law rather than religious decree. This precision reinforces the idea that liberation is not a matter of chance or fate, but of conscious, sustained effort in purifying the soul through disciplined conduct, meditative awareness, and renunciation of worldly attachments. Unlike other traditions that may allow for divine forgiveness or cosmic leniency, Jainism maintains that karma operates with mechanical precision, offering no shortcuts or exceptions. Even meritorious actions are seen as forms of bondage if they result in attachment to the fruits of good deeds. Thus, the ultimate goal is not to accumulate good karma but to eliminate all karma entirely through a process of samvara, stoppage of new karma, and nirjara, shedding of existing karma. This is accomplished through rigorous ethical living, penance, deep introspection, and the cultivation of detachment from all worldly entanglements, including ego, pleasure, and pain. By reducing desire and increasing self-mastery, the soul gradually disentangles itself from the karmic layers that obscure its innate divinity. The Jain model of karma also introduces a radical sense of moral realism, in which there is no appeal to fate, randomness, or divine will. Every moment of suffering is a result of prior causes, and every experience of joy is similarly earned through past virtue. This vision transforms the universe into a vast ethical field where justice is inescapable and precisely calibrated to the moral behavior of every soul over time. The emphasis on causality and personal responsibility can be both empowering and sobering, suggesting that liberation is within reach, but only through relentless ethical refinement and self-discipline. Each soul is the architect of its own destiny, and the purity or bondage of that soul is determined not by external circumstances, but by the moral texture of its own actions. Through this lens, karma is not merely a metaphysical doctrine, but a practical guide to living with integrity, awareness, and restraint, fostering a worldview in which every thought, word, and deed matters. The path to spiritual freedom is built on unwavering commitment to the principles of non-violence, truth, and self-control. By embedding the cosmic order within the moral fabric of everyday life, Jainism presents karma not as a force to be feared or revered, but as a mirror reflecting the soul's own conduct back upon itself, offering both a warning and a promise for those seeking liberation from the bonds of ignorance and suffering. Sunyata, or emptiness, is one of the most profound and transformative concepts in Buddhist philosophy, representing the absence of inherent independent essence in all phenomena. This radical idea challenges our conventional understanding of existence, which typically assumes that objects, people, and experiences have an essential nature or fixed identity. Sunyata posits instead that all things are empty of a permanent self or essence, existing only in relation to other factors and conditions. This interdependent nature means that nothing exists in isolation, but rather, everything arises in dependence upon causes and conditions, a concept known as dependent origination pratitya as amatpada. This absence of inherent essence, however, is not to be confused with nihilism, for it does not deny the existence of things, but reveals their fluid and contingent nature. At the heart of sunyata is the profound realization that all phenomena are impermanent and subject to change, and therefore cannot possess a fixed, independent identity. By recognizing the emptiness of all things, one begins to see that attachment to fixed identities and labels is the root of suffering. By clinging to things as if they possess inherent, unchanging qualities, we create false expectations and attachments, which ultimately lead to dissatisfaction and pain. Sunyata invites us to let go of these rigid notions and to see things as they are, ever-changing, interconnected, and devoid of lasting substance. This understanding allows for greater flexibility and freedom in how we engage with the world, freeing us from the grip of attachment and aversion that bind us in the cycle of samsara. The concept of emptiness also transforms how we understand the nature of self in Buddhism, where the belief in a permanent, unchanging self or soul is seen as a delusion. Sunyata teaches that the self, like all other phenomena, is empty of inherent existence. It is not a fixed, singular entity, but a collection of ever-changing physical, emotional, and mental processes that arise and dissolve based on conditions. The belief in a solid, permanent self is one of the most deeply ingrained attachments, and the realization of the self's emptiness is said to be a direct gateway to liberation. By seeing the self as a fluid, dynamic process rather than an eternal entity, one can transcend the ego and its limitations, opening the door to freedom from suffering. In practical terms, sunyata encourages a shift in how we perceive and relate to the world. By deconstructing the illusion of permanence and independence, it enables us to approach life with greater compassion and wisdom, recognizing that all beings, like ourselves, are subject to the same conditions of birth, decay, and death. This recognition fosters a sense of interconnectedness, dissolving the boundaries between self and other, and allowing for a deeper sense of empathy and understanding, as we see that the suffering of others is not separate from our own, and that we are all part of the same network of interdependent causes and conditions. Philosophically, sunyata does not negate the existence of the world or its phenomena, but rather transforms our relationship to them. It teaches that while things appear to have independent, inherent characteristics, they are in fact empty of such properties and exist only in their relational context. This perspective helps us to let go of the need for things to be fixed, stable, and permanent, which ultimately leads to greater peace and freedom in the face of life's inherent uncertainties and changes. Rather than being swept away by the impermanence of existence, the understanding of sunyata allows us to face change with equanimity, seeing it as a natural aspect of life, rather than something to resist or fear. In Buddhist practice, the realization of sunyata is seen as a key step toward enlightenment, for it is only by recognizing the emptiness of all phenomena that one can free oneself from the illusions that perpetuate suffering. By realizing that there is no permanent self, no fixed essence, and no inherent substance to any of the phenomena we encounter, one can begin to break free from the cycle of attachment, aversion, and ignorance that traps beings in samsara. This understanding leads to the cultivation of wisdom, prajna, and compassion, karuna, which are both born from the insight into emptiness. Seeing the world as empty allows us to engage with it more skillfully and with greater compassion, recognizing that all beings are caught in the same cycle of suffering, and that we all share in the quest for freedom from it. In the context of meditation and mindfulness practice, the insight into sunyata can be transformative. By cultivating awareness of the impermanent and empty nature of all things, one can reduce the tendency to cling to or reject experiences, thoughts, and emotions as if they are permanent and unchangeable. This liberating insight enables one to experience life with a sense of openness and fluidity, allowing each moment to unfold without the weight of preconceptions, judgments, or attachments. By training the mind to recognize the emptiness of all phenomena, the practitioner can achieve a state of peace and clarity that is unshaken by the transient nature of the world around them. Karuna is one of the core and transformative concepts in Buddhism, embodying the deep, unyielding compassion for the suffering of all sentient beings, and a commitment to alleviating that suffering. It is a fundamental aspect of the Bodhisattva path, where the enlightened being vows to remain in the cycle of samsara, not for personal gain, but to offer boundless compassion to all beings trapped in it, as a response to the universal truth of dukkha suffering. Karuna is not simply an emotional reaction to another's pain, but a conscious intentional response rooted in the understanding that all beings are interconnected, and that their suffering is not separate from our own. This profound recognition propels the practitioner to act with loving kindness and empathy towards all beings, whether human or non-human, whether close to us or far away. At the heart of Karuna is the realization that suffering arises from ignorance of the true nature of reality, of impermanence, and of the inherent interdependence of all life. By cultivating compassion, a practitioner seeks to awaken this wisdom within themselves and others, seeing beyond the surface of pain and the individual circumstances to understand its deeper roots in attachment, aversion, and delusion. This understanding transforms Karuna from a passive feeling of sympathy into a dynamic force that compels one to act, to ease the burdens of others not just through physical aid, but through emotional support, mindfulness, and spiritual guidance. Through such actions, compassion becomes a path of liberation not only for others, but for oneself as well. Karuna also involves the cultivation of empathy and equanimity, recognizing that the suffering of others is not simply an external phenomenon to be observed, but an invitation to experience and share in their pain. It calls us to recognize the inherent fragility of life, and the common vulnerability that all beings share in their pursuit of happiness and avoidance of suffering. This sense of shared humanity, indeed, shared sentience, is what transforms compassion into a universal practice encompassing all life forms, even those that may be distant or alien to us. The Buddha himself spoke of the immeasurable compassion that transcends all boundaries of time, space, and form, calling for the cultivation of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha, which together form the foundation for a life lived with wisdom and compassion at its core. In its most profound form, karuna leads to the understanding that alleviating suffering is not just about solving immediate problems, but addressing the deeper causes of suffering within the individual and society at large, such as ignorance, hatred, and greed. The cultivation of karuna asks one to question the ways in which they contribute to or perpetuate suffering, whether through thought, speech, or action, and to take responsibility for transforming these actions by acting with integrity, mindfulness, and compassion. Every act of kindness and every moment of understanding brings one closer to the realization that the suffering of another is never truly separate from our own. The practice of karuna also encourages a form of radical inclusivity, where no one is seen as beyond compassion's reach, no matter how lost, angry, or distant they may appear to be. It calls upon the practitioner to soften their hearts, to recognize that even those who harm others are ultimately suffering beings themselves, bound by their own ignorance and confusion. Through this lens, compassion is not conditional, but unconditional, an expansive, limitless force that seeks to ease suffering without judgment or expectation. While Buddhist texts emphasize that one must also take care of their own well-being, karuna ultimately does not discriminate between oneself and others, recognizing that true compassion can only be realized when one's own heart is free from clinging, aversion, and fear. What makes karuna uniquely transformative in Buddhism is its symbiosis with wisdom, prajna. The two qualities must coexist for compassion to be fully realized, otherwise it risks becoming mere sentimentalism or unchecked emotional reaction, which may unintentionally cause harm by enabling dependency or perpetuating suffering in subtle ways. Genuine compassion in Buddhism is always accompanied by deep wisdom that understands the impermanent nature of suffering and the interconnectedness of all life. Thus, karuna, in its truest form, is not only a response to immediate suffering, but a wisdom-driven force that leads to long-term liberation for all beings, gradually eradicating the roots of suffering within the world through small yet consistent acts of loving kindness and moral clarity. Anekantavada is one of the most intellectually rigorous and spiritually nuanced doctrines in Jain philosophy, articulating the idea that reality is complex, multifaceted, and cannot be fully grasped from any single point of view. This principle of non-absolutism challenges the very foundation of dogmatism and rigid belief by proposing that truth is not a fixed monolith, but a dynamic interplay of perspectives, each revealing only a partial aspect of the whole. Rooted in the recognition that human knowledge is inherently limited and conditioned by context, Anekantavada encourages humility in thought, patience in dialogue, and openness in inquiry, reframing certainty not as strength, but as a potential source of ignorance. By asserting that every statement is true in some respect and false in another, this doctrine transforms intellectual discourse from a battlefield of opposites into a collaborative journey toward deeper understanding. Emerging from the profound metaphysical insights of Jainism, Anekantavada is grounded in the broader cosmological belief that all substances possess infinite attributes and undergo constant change through infinite modes, making any static or singular description fundamentally incomplete. This perspective is more than a philosophical abstraction. It has ethical consequences, because clinging to a single viewpoint often leads to intolerance, conflict, and violence, while recognizing the validity of multiple perspectives fosters compassion, dialogue, and coexistence. The classic Jain illustration of the blind men and the elephant perfectly captures this insight. Each person touches a different part of the animal, and insists on their limited experience as the total truth, failing to see that the elephant is larger and more complex than any one account can capture. To support the application of Anekantavada, Jain thinkers developed the doctrine of Sayadvada, or the theory of conditioned predication, which uses the linguistic prefix sayad, meaning from a certain perspective, to qualify all statements. This allows for nuanced expressions of truth, such as the object exists from one standpoint, and does not exist from another, avoiding the binary trap of asserting absolute existence or non-existence, and instead inviting a deeper exploration of context, condition, and scope. Rather than undermining truth, this method refines it, making philosophical discourse more precise and intellectually honest while accommodating the subtleties of real-world experience. By embracing this layered approach to truth, Jain epistemology elevates ambiguity from a flaw to a feature, recognizing it as a necessary response to the infinite complexity of existence. Anekantavada also reconfigures the nature of debate and disagreement by emphasizing that opposing views are not necessarily wrong but incomplete, encouraging a dialogical process in which truth emerges not through refutation but through integration. The goal is not to defeat the other, but to refine one's own view by acknowledging what it lacks and where it may be overextended. This orientation fosters a culture of intellectual generosity and curiosity, where inquiry is shaped by humility rather than conquest, and where differing views are not threats but opportunities to see more clearly. In this sense, Anekantavada is not moral relativism but epistemic realism. It does not claim that all views are equally correct, but that no view alone can exhaust the truth. In a world increasingly polarized by rigid ideologies and tribal affiliations, the relevance of Anekantavada becomes more urgent than ever, offering a powerful framework for navigating complexity without collapsing into nihilism or fanaticism. It teaches that certainty is a double-edged sword, that the more firmly we believe we are right, the more likely we are to ignore what we have yet to understand, and in doing so to harm others through our ignorance. By acknowledging the limits of perception and the conditionality of knowledge, Anekantavada cultivates not only intellectual maturity but also ethical restraint. It asks us to listen more carefully, to think more slowly, and to engage the world with a mind spacious enough to hold contradiction, nuance, and mystery without collapsing them into simplicity or control. This discipline of non-absolutism does not lead to indecision, but to a wiser, more compassionate engagement with reality, where the search for truth becomes a shared endeavor rather than a solitary claim. Ahimsa is one of the most profound and uncompromising ethical principles in religious philosophy, articulating the idea that all forms of life are sacred and must never be harmed intentionally. This ideal reaches its fullest expression in Jainism, where nonviolence is not merely a moral recommendation but the central axis around which the entire spiritual path revolves. Rooted in the recognition that every living being from the largest mammal to the tiniest microorganism possesses a soul or jiva that is inherently valuable and capable of experiencing pain and liberation. Ahimsa challenges the very foundation of how we perceive power, dominance, and survival in a world often governed by competition and consumption. The Jains assert that true spiritual progress is impossible without a deep and unwavering commitment to minimizing harm in thought, word, and deed, making ahimsa not just a passive avoidance of violence but an active and meticulous way of living that honors the sanctity of life in all its forms. Unlike common ethical systems that weigh intentions against outcomes or allow for necessary evils, Jainism holds that even unintentional harm accrues karmic consequences that bind the soul deeper into the cycle of rebirth and suffering, thereby requiring a level of mindfulness and restraint that transcends conventional moral reasoning. This radical sensitivity manifests in the daily practices of devout Jains who often walk barefoot to avoid stepping on insects, wear cloth masks to prevent inhaling microorganisms, and filter water to protect even the unseen lives within. Each act of care becomes a spiritual discipline, a daily affirmation of the interconnectedness of all beings and the solemn responsibility that comes with awareness. Such practices are not rooted in fear or superstition but in the profound understanding that violence, no matter how small, distorts the soul and distances it from its ultimate goal of liberation or moksha. Philosophically, ahimsa in Jainism is inseparable from the doctrine of karma, which posits that every action leaves a subtle residue on the soul, influencing its trajectory across countless lifetimes. Even thoughts steeped in hatred, greed, or pride generate karmic particles that cling to the jiva, obscuring its innate purity and keeping it entangled in the material world. Ahimsa thus becomes the most effective and necessary method of spiritual purification, not by escaping the world but by engaging with it through compassion, restraint, and reverence. This worldview upends the assumption that strength lies in domination, proposing instead that the highest form of strength lies in self-control, humility, and the refusal to harm even when one possesses the power to do so. It redefines success not in terms of conquest or accumulation, but in the quiet dignity of harmlessness and the serenity of a conscience unburdened by cruelty. Unlike in many traditions where ethical behavior is seen as a means to social harmony or divine reward, Jainism views non-violence as a metaphysical necessity. The cosmic order is not restored by rituals or divine intervention, but by the relentless effort of individual souls to unshackle themselves from karmic entanglement through ethical living. In this view, ahimsa becomes not merely a rule to follow but a state of being to cultivate, a lens through which the entire universe is seen not as a field of resources to be exploited but as a sacred web of lives, each struggling in its own way toward liberation. The pursuit of ahimsa is not about moral perfectionism but about radical empathy. It is a lifelong endeavor to see oneself in all beings and to act accordingly, even when doing so is inconvenient, difficult, or misunderstood. The discipline of ahimsa also extends beyond physical violence to encompass speech and thought, recognizing that words can wound and intentions can bind just as deeply as actions. Thus, truthfulness, humility, and inner stillness become essential companions to nonviolence. Speech is softened by compassion, and silence is often preferred over argument, because every interaction is an opportunity either to uplift another soul or to burden it further. In this light, ahimsa is not the absence of action but the presence of awareness. It is a deliberate creative force that shapes each moment into an offering of peace and fosters a society where reverence for life is not abstract but lived in detail and discipline. Ultimately, ahimsa stands as a radical testament to the power of ethical clarity and spiritual discipline in a world fraught with conflict, urgency, and suffering. It insists that liberation cannot be won through conquest or submission, but only through the careful and loving unraveling of harm in all its visible and invisible forms. It teaches that true peace begins not with treaties or laws but with the quiet decision of a single soul to cause less pain, to walk more gently, and to see the divine not in the heavens above but in the eyes of the smallest being crawling across the earth. By transforming daily conduct into sacred practice, Ahimsa reveals the astonishing depth of human moral potential and offers a vision of spiritual freedom grounded not in abstraction, but in reverence, attention, and the courageous refusal to harm. Moksha, one of the ultimate goals of Hindu philosophy, refers to the profound liberation of the soul from the continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth known as samsara, an emancipation not merely from worldly suffering, but from the illusion of separateness itself. It is the release from the bondage of karma, the invisible law of cause and effect that ties every thought and action to future consequences, binding the soul to an ongoing journey through various lives. In achieving moksha, the individual self Atman recognizes its true identity as not distinct from but identical with the universal consciousness Brahman, dissolving the illusion of ego and duality that has obscured this truth for lifetimes. This realization is not merely intellectual. It is transformative, experiential, and irreversible, leading to a state of eternal peace, unshakable bliss, and oneness with the infinite. The concept of moksha is deeply rooted in the Upanishads, the philosophical texts that form the spiritual core of the Vedas. These ancient teachings explore the nature of reality, the structure of the self, and the hidden unity behind the apparent diversity of existence. One of the central declarations Tat Tvam Asi, you are that, encapsulates the essence of moksha, that the individual self is not separate from the ultimate reality it seeks. This realization is not a new acquisition but a remembering, a lifting of the veil that has concealed the soul's true nature. According to Hindu thought, the soul is already perfect and eternal. It is ignorance, avidya, that causes it to forget its divine essence and become entangled in the phenomenal world. Moksha is therefore not the creation of something new, but the uncovering of what always was. Philosophically, moksha challenges the ordinary way of seeing the world. It denies that lasting fulfillment can be found in transient experiences, material gain, or social status, no matter how refined. These are all part of the ever-turning wheel of samsara, which promises pleasure but delivers suffering when clung to. The Hindu sages liken worldly pursuits to mirages, appealing but ultimately empty. In contrast, moksha is not dependent on circumstances, achievements, or sensory gratification. It is a state of being beyond opposites, where there is neither pleasure nor pain, gain nor loss, birth nor death, only the silent, undivided awareness that is pure consciousness. This state is often described as Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness and bliss. Different philosophical schools within Hinduism offer varied paths to moksha, reflecting the diversity and depth of the tradition. The Advaita Vedanta school, for example, teaches that liberation comes through jhana knowledge, the direct insight into the non-duality of self and Brahman. Other paths emphasize devotion bhakti, selfless action karma yoga, or meditative discipline, Raja Yoga, as valid and powerful routes to the same goal. These paths are not mutually exclusive but often intertwined, recognizing that individuals have different temperaments and spiritual needs. Yet all agree on the central truth that liberation comes through transcendence, not by escaping the world, but by seeing through its illusions. Practically, the pursuit of moksha involves a profound reorientation of life. It demands the purification of the mind and the cultivation of virtues like detachment, truthfulness, compassion, and inner stillness. The seeker must learn to act without attachment to results, to love without possessiveness, and to see the self in all beings. This is not renunciation in the sense of withdrawal, but an inner freedom, a capacity to live fully in the world without being bound by it. Saints and sages who have attained moksha often continue to engage with life, yet they do so with a lightness, a serenity that reflects their unshakable rootedness in the infinite. They are not beyond emotion or relationship, but their joy is not contingent, their peace not disturbed. The metaphor of the ocean and the wave is often used to describe this state. The individual soul, like a wave, seems distinct, but it is never separate from the ocean of being. When moksha is attained, the wave does not vanish in fear or loss, it rejoins the ocean knowingly, realizing it was never anything else to begin with. This realization is both dissolution and fulfillment, the end of seeking and the discovery that what was sought was always present, nearer than breath, closer than thought. Moksha invites a radical shift in perspective, from doing to being, from grasping to letting go, from illusion to truth. It is the answer to the soul's deepest longing, and the culmination of countless lives of striving, learning, and evolving. In a world defined by impermanence, moksha stands as a vision of the eternal. In a life so often marked by confusion and restlessness, it offers clarity, completeness, and stillness. It is not just freedom from suffering, but freedom from the very structures that make suffering possible. And in that freedom, there is no longer a separate self to be liberated, only the vast silent presence of that which never was in bondage to begin with. Dharma, a foundational concept in Hindu philosophy, refers to the cosmic principle of order, truth, and right conduct that governs not only the workings of the universe, but also the moral and ethical duties of every individual within it. It is at once the structure of reality and the path by which one aligns with it. Unlike simple notions of law or morality, Dharma is multifaceted and context-sensitive, encompassing righteousness, duty, virtue, and the essential nature of things. It does not impose a one-size-fits-all morality, but recognizes that each being has a unique role to play, determined by their age, station in life, personal nature, and circumstances. Through the lens of Dharma, life itself becomes a sacred performance of harmony, where human choices are judged not by arbitrary rules, but by how closely they resonate with the deeper rhythms of the cosmos. The origins of Dharma trace back to the ancient Vedic texts, where it was first understood as the force that upholds Bhita, the natural and divine order of the universe. As Hindu thought evolved, so did the concept, becoming central to the epics like the Mahabharata and the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. In these texts, Dharma takes on a deeply personal and existential dimension. It is not simply what is lawful, but what is right in a particular situation, even when that rightness is difficult or unclear. Arjuna, the warrior prince of the Gita, is torn between his duty to his family and his duty to justice, illustrating the painful and often paradoxical choices that Dharma demands. Krishna's counsel, that one must act according to their svadharma, their own duty, without attachment to the outcome, transforms Dharma into not just a moral law but a spiritual path. Philosophically, Dharma resists reductive definitions, because it exists at the intersection of metaphysics, ethics, and social responsibility. It affirms that reality is not chaotic or meaningless, but infused with purpose and order, and that humans, through wisdom and discipline, can come into alignment with that order. At the same time, Dharma is fluid, adapting to the needs of different contexts. What is dharmic for a king may not be for a renunciate. What is dharmic in one age may not be in another. This adaptability makes Dharma both resilient and demanding. It does not allow for blind rule following, but calls for discernment, humility, and the courage to act rightly even when doing so involves personal sacrifice or public misunderstanding. In this way, Dharma is not a rigid law but a dynamic living truth. The social dimension of Dharma is reflected in the traditional system of Varna class and ashrama life stages, which outline the responsibilities appropriate to one's role in society. While this structure has been both revered and critiqued, its original intention was not to enforce hierarchy but to organize life in a way that supported spiritual development and social harmony. Each person, by fulfilling their Dharma, contributed to the balance of the whole. This principle extends even to seemingly mundane tasks. When performed with devotion and integrity, even the smallest duty becomes an offering to the divine. In this sense, Dharma elevates ordinary life into sacred ritual, turning daily actions into acts of alignment with the cosmic will. Yet Dharma is not merely societal, it is deeply personal. It demands self-knowledge, the ability to discern one's inner calling, and the discipline to act in accordance with it. Hindu philosophy teaches that true liberation, or moksha, cannot be attained through selfish renunciation or spiritual escapism alone, but through the patient fulfillment of Dharma without attachment to the fruits of action. This idea, captured in the Bhagavad Gita's call to act, but do not cling, turns Dharma into both a guide and a paradox. One must fully engage in life, yet not be bound by it. In doing so, one begins to transcend the ego and recognize the unity between their individual duty and the universal order. The pursuit of Dharma thus becomes a transformative journey, one that shapes not only the outer life of action, but the inner life of character. It cultivates qualities like truthfulness, compassion, courage, and equanimity, while grounding the individual in a broader vision of reality. It insists that ethical living is not a matter of external reward or fear of punishment, but a matter of resonance with the truth of existence itself. By following Dharma, one does not merely act rightly, they become aligned with the source of being, the silent harmony that holds the stars in their courses and the breath in our lungs. Ultimately, Dharma reveals a world that is not arbitrary or inert, but saturated with meaning and invitation. It calls each person not just to live, but to live well, to understand their place in the great fabric of life and to participate in it with mindfulness and reverence. In a time when moral clarity often feels elusive, and the pull of selfish desire is strong, Dharma offers a different vision, that fulfillment lies not in doing what we want, but in discovering and doing what is right. And in that doing, something greater is revealed, not just a better self, but a deeper truth about the nature of reality and our place within it. Free will and responsibility, a foundational concept in Jewish theology, affirms the profound dignity and moral agency bestowed upon every human being. The belief that individuals are endowed with the capacity to choose between good and evil, and are therefore accountable for their actions. This doctrine, deeply rooted in the Hebrew Bible and expanded upon by centuries of rabbinic thought, posits that while God is omniscient and sovereign, he does not dictate human choices. Rather, he grants each person the autonomy to shape their own moral destiny. At its core, the concept insists that ethical behavior is not coerced but freely chosen, and that this freedom is what makes virtue meaningful and justice possible. It is not merely a philosophical abstraction, but a lived principle that shapes the Jewish understanding of law, repentance, and the human relationship with the divine. The Torah articulates this belief with striking clarity, most notably in Deuteronomy, where Moses proclaims to the people, "I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse, therefore choose life." This exhortation underscores the dual reality of human existence, that each moment presents a fork in the road, and that the path taken is not predetermined, but selected through the will of the individual. The Jewish tradition rejects the idea that sin is inevitable, or that righteousness is beyond reach. Instead, it maintains that every person has the inner capacity to choose the good, regardless of past failures or present temptation. This perspective does not imply moral relativism but insists on moral realism. The world is filled with complex choices, and humans are tasked with navigating them through conscience, wisdom, and sacred teaching. Philosophically, the belief in free will within Judaism raises deep questions about divine foreknowledge and human autonomy. If God knows all that will happen, how can our choices be truly free? Jewish thinkers, from medieval philosophers like Maimonides to modern scholars, have grappled with this tension, often resolving it by asserting that divine knowledge exists on a plane beyond human comprehension, that God's omniscience does not negate human agency, because God knows our choices as they are freely made. In this view, God's foreknowledge is not causal but observational, and human freedom remains intact. This balance preserves both the majesty of God and the integrity of human choice, allowing for a theological system in which both divine providence and moral responsibility coexist without contradiction. This emphasis on moral agency infuses Jewish life with a distinctive sense of personal accountability. The mitzvot, commandments given by God, are not arbitrary rules, but concrete expressions of the moral order, designed to guide individuals toward justice, compassion, and holiness. Yet they are never imposed without consent. The Talmudic sages taught that everything is foreseen, but freedom of choice is given, highlighting a paradox that honors both divine awareness and human responsibility. It is this freedom that makes repentance, or teshuvah, possible and meaningful. If one were bound by fate or nature, there could be no true return, no change of heart, no moral growth. But because humans can choose, they can also choose again, returning to the path of righteousness no matter how far they have strayed. In practical terms, this doctrine impacts not only personal ethics but communal justice. Jewish law operates on the assumption that individuals are responsible for their deeds, and thus deserve both accountability and the opportunity for restitution. Courts may judge, communities may support or correct, but each person ultimately stands before God with the weight and wonder of their choices. This moral realism resists both fatalism and moral escapism. It does not permit the blaming of instincts, society, or divine will for wrongdoing. Instead, it challenges each individual to rise to their highest moral potential, while also offering the tools, ritual, learning, community to do so. Moreover, the belief in free will affirms the sacredness of the human person. It sees each individual as a moral agent capable of affecting the world for good or ill, and therefore as a partner with God in the ongoing work of creation and redemption. This partnership is not abstract. It is lived daily in the decisions one makes, in how one speaks, acts, earns, gives, forgives, and resists. It turns every moment into a moral opportunity and imbues even the smallest choices with eternal significance. In this way, the freedom to choose becomes not a burden but a blessing, a call to live deliberately, wisely, and ethically in a world that needs justice and love. Free will and responsibility in Judaism is not merely about autonomy, it is about purpose. It declares that humans are not passive recipients of divine decree, but active participants in the unfolding of history and holiness. It insists that each person is a moral universe, endowed with the ability to elevate or degrade themselves and their surroundings through the exercise of choice. In a tradition that values both humility before God and the infinite worth of the human soul, this belief stands as a testament to the dynamic, relational nature of Jewish theology, where law, love, and liberty intersect to create a life of meaning, accountability, and hope. Through it, Judaism offers not only a framework for justice, but a profound affirmation of what it means to be human. Theosis, a central doctrine in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, articulates the profound and transformative journey of the human person toward union with God, not merely in relationship, but in essence through grace, a process often described as becoming partakers of the divine nature. Rooted in both Scripture and the early Church Fathers, theosis is not an abstract metaphysical idea, but a lived reality, one that affirms the original purpose of humanity, to grow ever more fully into the likeness of God. This concept does not imply that humans become God by nature, that would be heretical, but rather that they are united with God by participation, through the transformative power of divine grace. It is a vision that sees salvation not simply as legal pardon or moral improvement, but as the ultimate healing and deification of the whole person, body and soul, through a lifelong synergy between human effort and divine energy. The mystery of theosis begins with the Incarnation, the moment when God became man in the person of Jesus Christ. In the Orthodox tradition, this event is not just about divine rescue, but divine invitation. As Saint Athanasius famously wrote, God became man so that man might become God. Here God is not a claim to autonomy or self-deification, but a humble submission to the life of God that flows into the human soul, reordering it from within. The Incarnation thus becomes both a revelation and a roadmap in Christ. The fullness of divinity is united to humanity, and through him humanity is invited into communion with the Trinity. This is not a theoretical abstraction but a deeply personal path, involving prayer, ascetic struggle, participation in the sacraments, and a life of love. In this way, theosis is not a sudden event but a gradual transformation, a journey of transfiguration that reflects the light of God more clearly with each step. Philosophically, theosis stands in contrast to dualistic or purely juridical understandings of the divine-human relationship. It does not separate the sacred from the material or the spiritual from the physical, but sees the entire human person as capable of bearing divine light. This view has radical implications for how one understands sin and redemption. Sin is not merely the breaking of rules but the distortion of the image of God within us, a disfigurement of our true nature. Redemption, then, is not simply about avoiding punishment, but about restoring that image until the human being becomes, in the words of Orthodox mystics, all flame. This process is not imposed from without, but cultivated from within, through the gradual purification of the heart, the illumination of the mind, and the sanctification of the body. It is the path by which human beings come to mirror the beauty, wisdom, and compassion of the God they seek. Liturgically and sacramentally, the Orthodox Church provides the framework for this journey. The Eucharist, confession, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving are not mere obligations but instruments of divine energy, pathways through which God's grace penetrates human life. Icons, too, play a crucial role in this vision. They are not just religious art but windows into heaven, reflecting the transformed humanity made possible through theosis. In fact, the icon of Christ is itself a theological statement that matter can bear divinity, and by extension, that every human being made in the image of God is capable of becoming a living icon, a visible sign of invisible grace. The lives of the saints serve as living examples of this reality. Ordinary people whose communion with God became so deep that they radiated peace, healed others, and transcended the limits of human weakness. Their stories are not presented as exceptions, but as invitations. In theological terms, theosis also redefines what it means to be truly human. It suggests that humanity's highest calling is not self-actualization or autonomy but communion, to live not apart from God but in God, and God in us. This communion is not an annihilation of individuality, but its fulfillment. In becoming like God, the human person becomes most fully themselves. The journey of theosis is a return to our original purpose, a homecoming to the divine embrace for which we were created. It transcends moralism, legalism and intellectualism by grounding salvation not in transaction but in transformation, by grace, through love, in freedom. This understanding avoids the traps of both Pelagian self-effort and passive fatalism by affirming synergy, the mysterious cooperation between divine initiative and human response. Ultimately, theosis invites the believer into a life that is nothing less than divine participation. It envisions not merely a better version of the self, but a new creation, a life animated by the Spirit, guided by the wisdom of the Church, and suffused with the uncreated energies of God. It insists that holiness is not the preserve of mystics and monks, but the destiny of every soul that seeks God with humility and perseverance. Theosis challenges superficial religion and transactional faith, replacing them with a vision of infinite ascent, where the more one knows God, the more one becomes love, light, and life itself. Divine mercy, a central and deeply cherished theme within Catholic theology, expresses the boundless compassion, patience, and forgiveness of God extended to humanity, especially in its moments of greatest need and failure. Unlike justice, which gives each according to their due, mercy is unearned and overflowing. It is the generous healing love of God poured out even when it is least deserved. This idea is not simply a moral attribute or emotional quality, but a living force that flows from the very heart of God's being, reaching into the darkest places of human brokenness to bring restoration. Divine mercy stands as a powerful affirmation that, no matter how grievous the sin or how far one has fallen, the door back to God is never closed. Through divine mercy, the Catholic faith invites every soul to trust not in their own worthiness, but in God's inexhaustible love and willingness to forgive. The theological grounding of divine mercy is found throughout Scripture, but reaches a particularly vivid expression in the revelations reported by Saint Faustina Kowalska, a Polish nun whose 20th century diary recounts mystical encounters with Christ. In these experiences, Jesus emphasized his desire that the world come to understand the depth of his mercy, saying, "The greater the sinner, the greater the right he has to my mercy." This radical statement turns common expectations upside down. Where guilt might otherwise create distance, divine mercy draws near. It redefines holiness not as separation from sin, but as the ongoing willingness to return to God's embrace, again and again. Through devotion to divine mercy, including the chaplet, the image of Jesus with rays of blood and water, and Divine Mercy Sunday, Catholics are invited to meditate on the profound truth that God's love is not limited by human failure. Philosophically, divine mercy challenges the boundaries of human logic and ethical systems. While human forgiveness often requires contrition, effort, or restitution, God's mercy is described as preceding all of that. It is not transactional. It is transformational. It flows not from obligation but from God's own nature, where love and justice are not in tension but perfectly integrated. The cross becomes the supreme symbol of this mercy, not a condemnation, but a reconciliation, not a mark of guilt, but a gateway to grace. In Catholic understanding, Jesus' death and resurrection are not just historical events, but the definitive revelation of divine mercy, a mercy that is victorious over sin and stronger than death. Here, Justice is not ignored but fulfilled through love that suffers in solidarity with the guilty, offering redemption rather than retribution. This concept also has profound psychological and pastoral implications. Divine mercy offers relief from the crushing weight of shame and the paralyzing fear of unworthiness. It tells the believer that God's love is not contingent upon performance or purity, but is available precisely in the place of woundedness. This does not diminish the seriousness of sin, but it reframes the response, not as punishment, but as invitation. The sacrament of reconciliation becomes not a courtroom but a healing encounter, where the soul burdened by failure is met not with condemnation but with tenderness. Through mercy, guilt is not erased, but transformed into humility, gratitude, and a renewed desire to love. This is why the message of divine mercy is not reserved for saints or mystics, but is extended to every person, especially those who feel furthest from God. Theologically, divine mercy reveals something essential about the nature of God. It teaches that God's first impulse is not wrath, but rescue, not judgment, but embrace. In this light, even divine justice is understood not as punitive but restorative. It is the setting right of what has gone wrong, always guided by mercy. The Church sees in divine mercy a response to the sufferings and moral confusion of the modern world, a world often marked by despair, cynicism, and spiritual numbness. Mercy offers an antidote. It reawakens the soul to hope, reminding humanity that it is never abandoned, never beyond reach. In times of war, injustice, or personal despair, the message of divine mercy speaks directly to the heart's cry for healing, reconciliation, and new beginnings. Divine mercy is not merely a doctrine to be studied, but a mystery to be lived. It calls for trust. Jesus, I trust in you, and for imitation as those who have received mercy are called to become instruments of it. In this way, divine mercy extends beyond private devotion to become a way of life, a lens through which the believer sees others not as sinners to be judged, but as souls to be loved. It reorients the spiritual journey from fear to confidence, from penance alone to joyful restoration. Just as a child returns to a parent after falling down, so too does the believer return to God, trusting not in their strength, but in the mercy that never fails. Divine mercy, then, is not an escape from justice, but its most profound fulfillment. It is the divine logic that sees brokenness, and chooses compassion, that sees distance, and chooses reconciliation. It speaks of a God who is not deterred by human failure, but who enters into it, to heal, restore, and save. In a world hungry for love that does not falter and forgiveness that does not run out, divine mercy stands as a luminous truth, a promise that in the heart of God, there is always more love to give. Predestination, particularly as articulated in Calvinist theology, stands as one of the most challenging and thought-provoking doctrines in Christian history, proposing that all events, including the eternal destinies of individuals, are ultimately willed by God. At the heart of this belief is the idea that nothing happens by chance or by mere human decision, but rather through the sovereign will and foreordained plan of an all-powerful, all-knowing Creator. In its most defined form, as developed by John Calvin during the Protestant Reformation, this doctrine asserts that before the foundation of the world, God elected some individuals to eternal salvation and others to eternal damnation, not based on any merit or action on their part, but according to the mysterious counsel of His divine will. This notion, often referred to as double predestination, strikes at the core of human self-understanding and evokes deep questions about freedom, justice, and the nature of divine love. To the modern mind, the idea that one's eternal fate is determined before birth can feel not only counterintuitive but unsettling, challenging the widespread assumption that moral choice and human striving determine spiritual outcomes. Yet within Calvinism, this doctrine is not intended to evoke despair but to magnify the glory of God's grace, by affirming that salvation is entirely dependent on God's initiative and not on human effort. Predestination underscores the radical nature of grace, that it is truly unearned, unmerited, and wholly dependent on God's mercy. The elect are not saved because they are more virtuous, or because they chose rightly. They are saved because God in His mercy chose to save them. This view dismantles any notion of self-salvation and places full reliance on divine sovereignty, emphasizing that even faith itself is a gift bestowed by God. Philosophically, predestination enters a complex dialogue with the concept of free will. If God ordains all that comes to pass, including human decisions, then to what extent can people be said to choose freely? Calvinist theologians have long wrestled with this tension, often resolving it by suggesting that divine sovereignty and human responsibility are not mutually exclusive, even if their full reconciliation lies beyond human understanding. This paradox mirrors other mysteries of Christian theology, where finite minds are invited to trust in the coherence of truths that transcend logic, much like the doctrine of the Trinity or the Incarnation. Critics argue that such a view reduces humans to passive instruments, but defenders contend that rather than negating agency, predestination situates it within a divine framework that ensures the ultimate fulfillment of God's purposes in creation. Historically, the doctrine of predestination has had profound cultural and psychological effects. In Puritan communities, for example, the belief created an intense inner life of self-examination and spiritual vigilance. Although no one could know with certainty if they were among the elect, signs such as moral discipline, industriousness, and heartfelt piety were often interpreted as indicators of election. This produced a paradoxical ethic. Humans could not influence their destiny, but they were called to live as if they were chosen, not to earn salvation but to respond gratefully to the possibility of it. Over time, this created both a spiritual seriousness and a unique form of psychological anxiety, as individuals searched for assurance in lives that bore the marks of divine favor. In this way, predestination shaped not only theological systems but also entire cultures, infusing them with a powerful sense of divine purpose and personal accountability. Theologically, the doctrine reflects a vision of God as utterly sovereign, utterly free, and utterly just, yet also utterly unknowable in his reasons. God's will is not subject to human critique or standards, it is its own standard. To believe in predestination is to affirm that history and salvation alike are in God's hands, unfolding not randomly but according to a plan so vast and intricate that no human mind can comprehend it. For some, this leads to awe and peace, a sense of resting in the certainty that nothing escapes God's control. For others, it sparks deep discomfort, as the idea of predetermined outcomes appears to negate the loving, responsive relationship many associate with God. Yet Calvinist theology insists that predestination should not be viewed through the lens of cold determinism, but through the lens of divine mystery and grace. It asks believers to trust not only in what they can see, but in the character of the God who wills it. Predestination serves as a stark yet sublime expression of the Reformed tradition's commitment to the primacy of God in all things. It forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about human limitation and divine freedom, and it reorients the believer's posture from self-reliance to deep humility. In doing so, it strips away illusions of control and invites a faith that is not transactional but surrendered, a trust that God's purposes, though often hidden, are always good. Like other theological doctrines that stretch the imagination and unsettle the soul, predestination does not offer easy answers, but it does offer a coherent, if radical, vision of a universe governed not by chance or chaos, but by the deliberate and merciful will of a sovereign God. In this sense, predestination is not merely a doctrine to be debated, but a mystery to be contemplated, one that calls believers to reframe their understanding of justice, mercy, and the very nature of divine love. Shekinah, a concept deeply woven into Jewish mysticism and tradition, refers to the divine presence of God that dwells among people, imbuing both individuals and communities with sacredness, guidance, and protection. Rooted in the Hebrew Bible, and later developed through rabbinic and Kabbalistic thought, Shekinah describes not just a distant or transcendent God, but a deeply intimate, immanent force that takes residence in the world, particularly among those who seek holiness. Unlike other theological constructs of God that emphasize transcendence, Shekinah emphasizes the nearness and closeness of God, suggesting that the divine is not just an abstract concept, but a presence actively at work in the everyday lives of believers. It evokes a sense of warmth, sanctuary, and personal connection with the divine, reminding people that God is not confined to the heavens but is intimately involved in their lives. This divine presence is most prominently seen in the Torah during the Israelites' journey through the wilderness, where God's presence was said to manifest in the form of a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, guiding and protecting the people. Over time, Shekinah came to represent not just a physical manifestation of God's presence, but the spirit of divine companionship and care that accompanies humanity through the trials of life. It suggests a paradox. Though God is beyond human comprehension, God's presence is always close, a paradox that holds together both the vastness and immediacy of the divine. It is the idea that God chooses to dwell with people, rather than remaining separate or aloof, making Shekinah one of the most relational and experiential aspects of the divine in Jewish thought. In Kabbalistic tradition, the Shekinah is often depicted as the feminine aspect of God, in contrast to the more masculine aspects such as the Sephirot of Kesser or Chokmah. Here, Shekinah is not merely a passive presence but an active force, a partner in the ongoing creation and repair of the world, particularly through human actions. This view emphasizes that human beings, through righteous deeds, prayer and spiritual practice, can bring the Shekinah into their lives and into the world, thus inviting the divine presence to heal and sanctify all things. In this sense, Shekinah is not only a concept but also a call to action, an invitation to make the world a dwelling place for God's holiness, a process that unfolds through the faithful lives of individuals and communities. Philosophically, Shekinah raises questions about the nature of divine immanence and transcendence. On one hand, it suggests that God is utterly beyond human comprehension, an infinite being who cannot be contained or fully grasped by finite minds. On the other hand, it insists that God is also intimately close, present in the most mundane of moments and the most ordinary of human experiences. This duality challenges conventional religious ideas by holding together the mystery of God's transcendence with the promise of God's nearness, pointing to a relationship that is both awe-inspiring and deeply personal. In this way, Shekinah reflects the Jewish understanding that God is not static but dynamic, not distant but actively engaged in the world. Theologically, Shekinah also carries a rich ethical dimension. If the Shekinah represents God's presence in the world, then it suggests that the holiness of the divine is not separate from the struggles, joys and daily actions of human life. It teaches that God's presence is revealed not in mystical or esoteric experiences alone, but in the concrete actions of justice, kindness and love. For Jewish thinkers, this means that the Shekinah is most deeply felt when the community lives according to the highest ethical principles, when the needy are cared for, when the oppressed are liberated, and when people live in peace with one another. It becomes a reminder that every human action, however small, has the potential to bring God's presence into the world, sanctifying it in ways that might otherwise be unseen or unacknowledged. Moreover, the Shekinah is said to dwell most profoundly in places where God's people gather, whether in synagogues, homes, or even in the public spaces where justice is pursued. The Talmud teaches that when two or more Jews gather to study Torah or engage in prayer, the Shekinah is present among them. This communal aspect highlights the social and relational nature of Shekinah. Its presence is often experienced not in isolation, but in the togetherness of worship, study and service. The Shekinah is thus a sign of God's care for the community, and an invitation to create spaces where the divine can dwell, be experienced, and be manifested through collective actions. The concept of Shekinah serves as both a profound theological statement and a practical guide for daily living. It encourages believers to cultivate awareness of the divine presence in every aspect of their lives, and to act in ways that invite that presence to flourish. It asks that human beings not only look to the heavens, but also look to one another and to the world around them as places where God's presence is hidden, waiting to be revealed. Shekinah teaches that holiness is not confined to sacred spaces or moments, but is accessible in every breath, every relationship, and every act of goodness. It underscores that God, while beyond understanding, is also intimately involved in the world, guiding and sustaining the faithful through the presence of the divine that is always already with them. Teshuvah, a concept deeply embedded in Jewish spirituality, represents more than just the act of repentance. It is a profound process of return to God, to one's truest self, and to the sacred rhythms of life. Rooted in the Hebrew Bible, Teshuvah literally means return, signifying the restoration of a relationship that has been fractured, whether through sin, negligence, or estrangement. This concept, particularly emphasized during the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is central to the Jewish understanding of redemption and moral renewal. Unlike many forms of repentance that focus solely on seeking forgiveness, Teshuvah encompasses a complete transformation of heart and behavior, a turning away from past actions, and a turning toward God with sincerity and commitment. It acknowledges human imperfection, but also emphasizes the possibility of renewal and the profound grace that allows a return to divine favor. What makes teshuvah distinct is its multifaceted process. First, there is the act of cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of the soul, where the individual honestly reflects on past wrongdoings, both the overt and the subtle. This self-examination requires deep introspection and a willingness to confront one's failings without defense or avoidance. The next step is vidui, the verbal confession of sins, where the individual takes responsibility for their actions and articulates their wrongs before God. This acknowledgement is not just a mere listing of misdeeds, but an active intentional recognition of the harm done, whether to others, oneself, or the divine. Teshuvah, however, does not stop at words. It involves repairing the breach, which may include seeking forgiveness from those harmed and making restitution where possible. Finally, there is the commitment to change, symbolized by Kabbalah al-Hayatid, the resolve not to repeat the offense in the future, accompanied by tangible actions that demonstrate sincerity and growth. Philosophically, teshuvah offers a radical view of human agency and divine mercy. It suggests that repentance is not merely an act of appeasement, but a dynamic, restorative process, where the individual actively realigns their will with God's. It reveals a vision of God not as distant or punitive, but as a gracious, always present listener, ever ready to receive those who seek reconciliation. This creates a sense of agency in the believer, for teshuvah is not only about divine forgiveness, but about human empowerment to transform and become better. In this sense, teshuvah does not negate the seriousness of sin, but provides a path to redemption that preserves the dignity of human free will. It offers hope in the possibility of change, no matter how far one may have strayed, affirming that the human being is always capable of returning to God, no matter the past. Moreover, teshuvah touches on deep existential truths about the human condition. It teaches that failure is not final, mistakes are not irrevocable. In a world often dominated by shame and the fear of irreparable harm, teshuvah insists that the past does not define the future. It offers a framework of healing, showing that sin or wrongdoing is not an irreversible stain, but an opportunity for growth and transformation. In this way, it is not simply a theological concept, but a way of life, constantly inviting the believer to strive for personal and communal purification, to become more conscious, more ethical, and more attuned to the divine presence in everyday actions. Theologically, teshuvah offers a profound perspective on the nature of sin and divine justice. It asserts that God's judgment is not merely about condemnation, but about the possibility of restoration. The Midrash teaches that God is closer to the person in their sin than at any other time, a radical assertion that frames sin not as a permanent separation but as a temporary rupture that can be mended through sincerity and effort. Teshuvah emphasizes that the divine response to repentance is not only forgiveness, but the restoration of the sinner to a state of grace, often with the added dimension of a deeper connection to God than existed before the transgression. This underscores the notion that repentance and return are not merely about undoing wrongs, but about creating an even more intimate relationship with God, grounded in a renewed sense of commitment and understanding. Ultimately, teshuvah represents both a challenge and a gift. It is a challenge because it demands self-awareness, courage, and a deep commitment to moral and spiritual growth. It is a gift because it offers the possibility of forgiveness, renewal, and the restoration of one's connection to the divine. In a world often defined by the weight of regret and the fear of judgment, teshuvah offers a pathway to freedom, showing that the door to reconciliation with God is always open, and that the process of repentance is itself transformative. It invites every person to view their life not as a linear progression of mistakes and failures, but as a series of opportunities for spiritual return, growth, and redemption. Teshuvah teaches that no matter how far one has fallen, the journey back to God, marked by introspection, repentance, restitution, and change, is always possible, always open, and always redemptive. Imago Dei, Latin for the image of God, is one of the most profound and far-reaching concepts in Christian theology, asserting that human beings in their very nature reflect something of the divine. This idea, drawn from the opening chapters of Genesis, where it is written that God created humanity in his own image, male and female, invites a sweeping reimagining of what it means to be human, not merely biological entities or moral agents, but sacred reflections of the Creator. Unlike other theological doctrines that operate at the level of salvation, sin or redemption, the Imago Dei speaks to something more elemental, the core identity of every human being as bearing a divine imprint, regardless of status, belief, ability, or condition. It insists that dignity is not earned through virtue or power, but is inherent, universal, and irrevocable. This belief functions not just as a theological claim, but as the foundation for an entire ethical worldview. If every person bears the image of God, then every person possesses infinite worth, and any act of injustice, be it violence, exploitation, or dehumanization, becomes not only a moral wrong, but a kind of sacrilege. The Imago Dei thus becomes the basis for Christian commitments to human rights, charity, and justice, offering a metaphysical grounding for compassion and social responsibility. It challenges systems that reduce people to roles, functions, or statistics, and instead calls for a vision of society rooted in reverence for the sacred mystery present in every face. In this way, it quietly undermines hierarchies of race, class, gender, and ability by locating the source of human value, not in external traits, but in divine resemblance. Yet what exactly constitutes this image has been the subject of theological debate for centuries. Some traditions have located it in reason, seeing the capacity for logic, creativity, and self-awareness as mirroring divine intellect. Others have emphasized relationality, pointing to love, communion, and the ability to form bonds as the true reflection of a Trinitarian God. Still others argue for a more holistic view, encompassing the physical, spiritual, emotional, and ethical dimensions of human life. Regardless of the model, all agree that the Imago Dei is not something humans possess in fragments, but something they are, an ontological reality that shapes the entire human experience. Even in conditions of suffering or moral failure, the image is not erased, though it may be obscured or distorted. The Christian tradition holds that Christ, as the perfect image of God, both reveals and restores this image in humanity, offering a path to renewed likeness through grace and transformation. Philosophically, the Imago Dei introduces a unique blend of realism and aspiration into the anthropology of Christianity. On the one hand, it affirms an essential non-negotiable goodness in human nature, a starting point of value that predates sin or achievement. On the other, it holds out a vision of who humans are meant to become, fully alive, fully loving, fully aligned with divine intention. This duality gives the doctrine both stability and dynamism. It roots identity in God, while directing growth toward God. It also opens up deep questions about freedom, responsibility, and moral agency. If we are made in the image of God, what does it mean to live in a way that reflects that image, to forgive, to create, to steward, to serve? And how do we recognize that same image in others, especially when hidden beneath the scars of trauma, evil, or neglect? The Imago Dei is not only a theological lens but also a spiritual invitation to see ourselves and others not as accidents of biology or mere consumers of experience, but as icons of the infinite, created with purpose and held in divine regard. It transforms ordinary encounters into sacred moments, as each interaction becomes a meeting with one who bears God's likeness. In liturgy, in ethics, in solitude, and in community, this idea pulses quietly beneath the surface, reminding the believer that behind the fragile and flawed reality of human life lies a deeper, unshakable truth. We were made to reflect glory. And while that image may be marred by sin or overshadowed by suffering, it is never lost. Ultimately, Imago Dei functions as a theological cornerstone and a humanizing force, a claim that bridges doctrine and experience, faith and justice, identity and destiny. It offers a vision of human life that is both humbling and exalting, grounding moral action in sacred reality, and lifting everyday existence into the sphere of the divine. In a fractured world so quick to divide, devalue, and discard, the Imago Dei whispers a different truth, that every person is already marked by eternity, and to love them is in some mysterious way to draw closer to the face of God. Grace in Christianity is one of the most powerful and paradoxical ideas in religious thought, describing a form of divine favor that is given freely, without being earned, deserved, or even fully understood by the recipient. It stands as a radical interruption in the expected moral economy of reward and punishment, offering instead a love that precedes merit and a forgiveness that transcends justice. At its core, grace is not a reward for righteous behavior, but the starting point of transformation. It is God's initiative, reaching into the brokenness of human life with the offer of healing, reconciliation, and new life. This unmerited quality of grace is precisely what makes it so astonishing. It challenges deep instincts about fairness and reciprocity by suggesting that God's love is not a transaction but a gift. Grace appears most vividly in the New Testament, especially in the writings of Paul, where it becomes the central mechanism of salvation. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. Paul writes in Ephesians, underscoring that even the ability to believe is enabled by grace. This means that human effort, though valuable, is not the engine of salvation. It is God who moves first, who justifies the ungodly, who offers pardon not after moral achievement, but in the very moment of failure. Such an idea is not just spiritually liberating, but theologically destabilizing, because it removes any grounds for spiritual pride or control. The sinner and the saint both stand before God, not as competitors but as recipients of the same undeserved mercy. Historically, the doctrine of grace has shaped entire theological systems and spiritual practices. In Augustine's battle against Pelagianism, grace emerged as the decisive line between divine sovereignty and human autonomy. In the Reformation, Martin Luther's insistence on sola gratia, grace alone, became a rallying cry against the perceived legalism of works-based righteousness. And in the lives of countless mystics and ordinary believers, grace has been experienced not as an abstract doctrine, but as a sudden overwhelming sense of being known, forgiven, and embraced by a love that asks nothing in return. This experiential aspect of grace, its arrival when least expected, its capacity to melt hardness of heart, has made it a theme of countless hymns, prayers, and confessions, none more famous than Amazing Grace, which speaks of being lost and then found, blind but now seeing. Philosophically, grace challenges assumptions about causality and moral worth. If grace is truly unearned, then it cannot be predicted, demanded, or systematized. It introduces an element of holy unpredictability into human affairs, a divine surplus that breaks through the limits of logic and merit. Some theologians have even argued that grace is not just a quality of God's action, but a revelation of God's very nature, that to give without condition is not merely something God does, but who God is. This makes grace not an exception to divine justice, but the deepest expression of divine freedom and love. Still, this raises difficult questions. If grace is given to some and not others, is it truly free? If it overrides justice, does it risk trivializing evil? These tensions have animated centuries of theological reflection, and continue to provoke both awe and debate. Yet grace is perhaps best understood, not through systems but through stories. The prodigal son welcomed home, the thief on the cross received into paradise, the outcast touched and healed without condition. These narratives do not explain grace, they reveal it, showing how it breaks into lives burdened by shame, fear, or failure, and offers a new beginning that no one could have earned. Grace, then, is not sentimental or soft, it is fierce in its generosity, wild in its reach, and often scandalous in its targets. It does not confirm human worth, so much as create it anew, affirming that identity and value come not from achievement, but from being beloved by God. Ultimately, grace in Christianity serves as both a theological cornerstone and a spiritual invitation, a call to live not in the anxiety of self-justification, but in the freedom of being forgiven, chosen, and cherished. It invites believers to extend the same generosity they have received, to forgive as they have been forgiven, and to see others not through the lens of merit, but through the eyes of mercy. In a world driven by performance and conditioned by judgment, the logic of grace stands as a quiet but revolutionary alternative, revealing a divine economy where love is never earned, yet always offered. Baraka is one of the most subtle yet deeply resonant concepts in Islamic spirituality, describing a mysterious, non-material blessing or divine force that emanates from God and infuses people, objects, time, or places with a kind of enduring goodness, vitality, or growth beyond their apparent capacity. Unlike material wealth or measurable success, Baraka operates on a different axis, quietly multiplying benefit, extending sufficiency and nurturing unseen harmony in a way that often defies rational explanation. It challenges the modern fixation on quantifiable productivity by suggesting that divine grace, not human effort alone, is the ultimate source of abundance. For instance, two individuals may perform the same task, yet one finds serenity, success, and unexpected support along the way, while the other struggles without result, and in Islamic understanding, the difference may lie in the presence or absence of baraka. This concept cannot be manufactured or predicted through technique or formula, rather it flows as a gift from God, often linked to sincerity, humility, gratitude, and ethical living. It may manifest in something as ordinary as a meal that nourishes more than it should, time that stretches to accommodate far more than expected, or relationships that bring peace instead of strain. In this way, baraka reorients attention from outward accumulation to inward sufficiency, encouraging a spiritual ecology where intention and purity of heart become more important than volume or scale. Islamic tradition holds that acts of remembrance, dhihr, charity and trust in God attract baraka, while deceit, arrogance and heedlessness repel it, underscoring its moral and metaphysical dimension as not merely divine favor, but a reflection of spiritual alignment. Baraka also plays a crucial role in sacred history, as the Quran and prophetic traditions repeatedly highlight moments and figures suffused with this divine blessing. The Prophet Muhammad himself is described as having brought baraka wherever he went, his presence increasing food, calming tempests, and healing hearts. Certain times, like the month of Ramadan or the night of Laylat al-Qadr, and certain places, like Mecca and Medina, are also identified as carriers of baraka, not in a superstitious sense, but because they serve as openings where divine presence becomes more accessible, more concentrated. This idea, while rooted in theology, spills into daily life. A home filled with gratitude and prayer is believed to be filled with baraka, just as time spent in service or learning is said to become blessed beyond its clock duration. Philosophically, baraka resists empirical classification because it transcends causality as we commonly understand it. It shares an abstract kinship with concepts like grace in Christian theology, or manna in Polynesian cosmology, yet remains distinct in its deeply ethical and theocentric orientation. Islamic scholars have long debated the metaphysical status of baraka. Is it a created quality placed by God, or is it an aspect of His direct action? Either way, its logic emphasizes that spiritual forces permeate the material world in ways that can't be reduced to mechanics. This points to a layered reality, where the visible is only a fragment of the real, and where outcomes depend as much on divine proximity as on human calculation. Baraka ultimately asks the believer to cultivate receptivity, rather than control, to prepare one's heart, actions, and surroundings in ways that make them hospitable to divine blessing. It reframes the meaning of success, not as what can be acquired or measured, but as what endures, nourishes, and uplifts beyond one's own doing. In a time obsessed with acceleration and productivity, the idea of baraka serves as a gentle countercurrent, inviting a slower, more attuned, more sacred rhythm of life. It teaches that God's generosity does not always follow the logic of cause and effect, but often flows through unseen channels to those who live in awareness, trust, and gratitude. As such, baraka remains one of the most cherished and quietly transformative concepts in the Islamic worldview, a subtle reminder that behind every moment of peace, every unexpected ease, and every disproportionate return, lies the touch of the divine. Tawhid is one of the most foundational and profound concepts in Islamic theology, asserting the absolute oneness and indivisibility of God in a way that radically shapes every facet of Islamic thought and practice. At its core, Tawhid is not merely the belief in one God, but the uncompromising affirmation that God is unique, singular, and without equal or partner in any conceivable dimension, be it essence, attributes, or acts. This idea challenges common intuitions about divinity, especially when contrasted with polytheistic frameworks, or even with certain philosophical notions of divine plurality, where different aspects or manifestations are ascribed to the divine being. Tawhid insists that all such distinctions are fundamentally misleading, because God in Islam is utterly unlike creation and beyond the limits of human comparison or analogy. This leads to a strict theological minimalism, no idols, no intermediaries, no divine sons or incarnations. Only God, whose unity is absolute, without fragmentation or division. The implications of Tavid ripple far beyond theology, and into the moral and existential spheres of life. It reframes the way a believer understands authority, causality, and purpose in the universe, as everything is ultimately attributed to the will and knowledge of a single creator. In this sense, it is not just a doctrinal point, but an existential orientation that informs ethics, law, worship, and metaphysics. For example, to rely on anything other than God, to seek ultimate help from created beings, or to attribute success or misfortune to mere chance is, in the logic of Tavid, to subtly fracture the unity of the divine and fall into shirk, the gravest theological error in Islam. This unyielding monotheism also serves as a unifying principle across the diverse expressions of Islamic thought, grounding mysticism, jurisprudence, and even political philosophy in the same metaphysical claim: there is no God but God. Philosophically, Tavid defies easy categorization. It resists both pantheism, which merges God with creation, and deism, which separates God too far from creation. Instead, Islamic thinkers developed a robust tradition that preserves God's transcendence while affirming divine immanence through God's names and attributes. Yet even here, Tavid demands restraint. Attributes like mercy, power, and knowledge are affirmed without implying multiplicity within God's essence. Classical theologians debated how to speak of these divine qualities without compromising divine unity, leading to sophisticated frameworks in Ash'ari, Maturity, and Sufi metaphysics. This tension between affirming God's traits and preserving divine simplicity lies at the heart of Islamic philosophical theology, mirroring age-old questions about unity and multiplicity in metaphysical traditions globally. The concept of Tavid thus becomes not just a theological position but a lens through which the entire cosmos is perceived. Every act of worship in Islam, from the simple utterance of prayer to the performance of pilgrimage, is ultimately a rehearsal and reinforcement of this unity. The Quran constantly returns to this theme, portraying polytheism not merely as theological error but as a distortion of the deepest reality of existence. By asserting that nothing exists independently of God, Tavid simultaneously dignifies creation, because it reflects divine will, and humbles it, because it is contingent, not absolute. In the mystical tradition, this logic blossoms into the notion of Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being, where all multiplicity is seen as a veil over the one true existence of God. Yet even here, the strict principle of Tavid insists that such unity must never blur the creator-creation distinction, preserving the sacred otherness of the divine. Ultimately, Tavid is not a dry metaphysical claim but a lived reality, a constant recalibration of the heart and mind toward the singular source of all that is. It invites believers to witness the signs of divine unity in the vast diversity of the world, to see order and meaning in what appears fragmented, and to surrender entirely to the one in whom all things find their origin and return. Like the most elegant truths in mathematics or physics, Tavid operates with a kind of minimalist precision that conceals a profound depth, offering not just theological coherence but spiritual clarity. It asks the believer to strip away illusions of autonomy and multiplicity, and to behold, behind the veil of existence, the radiant simplicity of divine oneness.